Chapter 34. Casually hunting for monster cores. Looking at the detached head spin through the air as the body spasmed spraying blood, Tai Ta's face was full of alarm. At this moment they had easily killed a Class 1 magical beast, allowing himself to feel more confident about his strength. The cyan-colored viper hadn't even made Tai Ta expend a great amount of his energy at all. Jian Chen slowly separated the body of the viper from the iron rod and wiped the blood onto the surrounding grass. It had actually been Jian Chen who contributed the most in killing the Class 1 magical beast. If it were not for his lightning-quick thrust through the viper's body and dealing it a huge wound as it was pierced, then Tai Ta's battle-axe would not have been able to sever the snake's head. Recollecting his battle-axe, Tai Ta's face looked at the detached head proudly while stepping on the viper's dead carcass. Chongyang Xiang Tian, this is a Class 1 magical beast? How weak it was. Jian Chen laughed as he heard Tai Ta. It's not that the magical beasts are weak, it's because us two combined are too strong. Besides, this Class 1 magical beast wouldn't give much trouble for even a person who just recently broke through to becoming a saint. Tai Ta returned Jian Chen's smile and wiped his battle-axe dry from the blood. Bringing it to his shoulder, he let loose a laugh and said, "If you say that, then doesn't that mean we can casually walk around and kill Class 1 magical beasts?" It looked as if Jian Chen had came to a realization as his face revealed a joyful smile. "Not bad, with our two strengths. Even if we were to fight against a Class 1 magical beast by ourselves we would be able to kill it easily. But if we were to join together, then no magical beast in the second region would be able to bring us trouble. The magical beasts here aren't strong because the academy had meant for them to be for students to help pick up battle experience. There won't be any strong magical beasts here except..." He trailed off in thought. Jian Chen's silence caused Tai Ta to pause. "Except what? Unless we come across a group of magical beasts. However, we still don't know what's here or not." Jian Chen's face was serious as he spoke. With his strength, Jian Chen would not find any problems if he came across a Class 1 magical beast, but if he came across a whole group of them, then there would be no way at all. Tai Ta wrinkled his eyebrows together and said uncertainly, "That shouldn't be likely. I've been in the forests many times and never saw a whole bunch of magical beasts together. It's not for sure we won't. I've read up in the library on books pertaining to magical beasts. There are a few types of magical beasts that all live in a group together. Together, their power is strong and very rarely do they travel by themselves." Jian Chen walked over to where the decapitated snakehead was, and only then did he realize that the viper was only 6 to 7 meters long. Using the iron rod to cut 7 meters in, he took out the rod from the viper's body to reveal a bloody crystal. Within the Tian Yuan continent, there were many different types of monster cores. While their monster cores were not at all like each other. Some magical beasts had their monster core in the head, some in the pit of their stomachs, and some in their abdomen. The viper, for example, had its monster core within its tail, but Jian Chen had already known that a long time ago. Pang! Tai Ta brought down the battle-axe on his shoulder into a tree. It sunk into the tree as smoothly like water in a bucket before he cried out loudly, "If there really are magical beasts that are in a group, Tai Ta will definitely kill them all." Jian Chen held the monster core he got from the cyan viper and rubbed it clean of blood with the nearby grass. Throwing it to Tai Ta, he said, "All right, there's no need to yell. There's a lot of magical beasts that travel in herds in the Tian Yuan continent, but it doesn't mean we'll meet up with one for sure. Nothing is for sure, after all, this is the magical beast forest." Tai Ta snatched the monster core thrown at him and looked at Jian Chen weirdly. "What are you doing giving this to me?" Jian Chen laughed. "The viper was slain by you, so this monster core is yours by rights." Seeing Tai Ta trying to find a reason against this, Jian Chen continued to say, "This monster core is yours, don't say otherwise. Just take it. After all, we still have 3 more days. At our current rate we'll definitely be able to get a lot more, so I don't really care for this one monster core." "Haha, okay then. I'll be taking this monster core. The next monster core will be yours no matter who kills it then." Holding the blood-stained monster core high up in the air, Tai Ta was extremely happy. Though that was for sure since this was the first monster core he had gotten after killing a Class 1 magical beast. Afterwards, the two of them continued on their way. Now that he knew that Jian Chen had an acute sense for detecting danger, Tai Ta had simply handed the patrolling duties to Jian Chen. On the other hand, he began to ceaselessly hack at the grass in front of them to clear their path. Although constantly waving the heavy battle-axe around expended a great amount of energy, it was as simple as eating a meal to Tai Ta, who had godly strength. To him, This action wasn't the slightest bit taxing. After all, his strength was great enough to frighten others, and he seemed to have infinite amounts of energy as well. Thus, it was impossible for him to become exhausted in a situation like this. Not long after the two had left, Jian Chen's ears twitched, and his footsteps came to an abrupt halt. He stretched his hand out towards Tai Ta, who was currently slashing at the grass in front of them, and gestured at him to be silent. Tai Ta intuitively understood the situation, and stopped his attempt at hacking through the weeds. Tightly gripping the battle-axe, he returned to Jian Chen's side, and stood shoulder to shoulder with him. Tai Ta's eyes flashed, as he inspected their surroundings with caution. Their breathing became very faint, as their expressions were filled with caution. The difference between the two was that Tai Ta was constantly looking around, while Jian Chen had gently closed his eyes in an attempt to sense everything around them. It was currently extremely difficult to discern anything among the grass. Even if there really was an unknown danger lurking around, it would unfortunately not be something that one could use the naked eye to see. Thus, Tai Ta could not discover anything despite sweeping his gaze around all four corners for a long period of time. Jian Chen lightly closed his eyes, his keen ears twitching periodically as they tried to catch all noises coming from his surroundings. At the same time, his consciousness also reached new heights, and he used his powerful soul to reach out and sense the world around him. At that moment, Jian Chen could not help but recall one of his fights against Dugu Qiubai. Eventually, just as he was about to die, his powers had suddenly broken through and reached the realm of the sword god. At that moment, his soul had become incomparably strong and could even manifest it outside his body into the surrounding air. Whenever he spread his soul out into an area, then there would be no way anyone or anything inside would be able to escape his perception. However, what made Jian Chen feel regret was that after entering this world, although his soul was extremely powerful, he could no longer extend it outwards. Otherwise, this dense forest would not give Jian Chen any difficulties at all. Searching for a hidden magical beast would be extremely easy. Jian Chen's soul densely concentrated together, and he exerted all his efforts to sense his surroundings. Slowly, his spirit entered a unique state. Although he had not extended his soul at that instant, his soul seemed to have established a subtle relationship with the various plants around him, fusing together. This feeling was extremely mysterious. However, as soon as Jian Chen entered this state, his senses immediately shot up to new levels. Finally, a barely discernible breathing sound entered his sensing range. The breath was so faint that even if one stood next to it, one most likely wouldn't have been able to hear it. In an instant, Jian Chen opened his eyes, and in a flash, he had already disappeared from his original location, and was flying towards the side at high speeds. While moving, Jian Chen constantly twisted and adjusted his body to evade the branches obstructing his path. In an instant, Jian Chen had already crossed over a distance of 10 meters. He quickly thrusted out the iron rod in his hands at lightning-fast speed, silently cutting away the surrounding leaves and weeds, the tip aimed towards the black figure hiding within the grass. Ayo! A shriek of pain suddenly rang out, as a dark shadow jumped out from the grass, leaping towards Jian Chen with its ferocious mouth wide open. This was a black panther, around 2 meters long. Its head had an open wound where fresh blood was pouring out from. The blood flowed down through the black fur on its face, intensifying its fierce appearance. Jian Chen's gaze was as sharp as a sword as a sneer began to form on his face. He shook his arm, and once again lashed out with the iron rod in his hand at an unfathomable speed, his objective being the Black Panther's neck. Up until the end, the Black Panther had absolutely no time to react, as the iron rod's sharp point plunged deeply through its throat. In addition, since the Black Panther's body was currently lunging in the air, its heavy body quickly dropped downwards, pushing the iron rod deeper and deeper through its neck. Eventually, the point had drilled a hole directly through, and the end had come out of the other side. This time, the Black Panther didn't even have the time to cry out before it had already died. It fell to the ground with its eyes wide open, grief instilled in its gaze. At that moment, Tai Ta finally caught up from behind. When he looked over at the ground, he saw the corroded iron rod pierce through the Black Panther's throat. Immediately, his eyes widened in extreme shock. Changyang Xiang Tian this. Did you kill this? Tai Ta's voice was trembling in shock. Even though he had witnessed the moment that Jian Chen's weapon had pierced through the Black Panther's throat, he still couldn't believe the scene no matter how hard he tried. That was because the period of time that had passed was way too short. When Jian Chen had charged over, Tai Ta had already followed behind at his fastest speed. However, by the time he had caught up, all he saw was the Class 1 magical beast dying by Jian Chen's hands. The amount of time that had passed was definitely not even long enough to take a breath, or even half a breath. Being able to kill a Class 1 magical beast in half a breath's time was natural for some professionals. However, Tai Ta clearly knew that Jian Chen's abilities had not yet reached saint level. Moreover, the weapon he was using was a mere corroded iron rod. Jian Chen placed his foot on the Black Panther's head, and gradually pulled out the iron rod. As if nothing had happened, he said, "That's right, I killed it. However, it was just a coincidence. Originally, there was no way it would have died so quickly. However, it kept approaching my weapon, and in the end, its life was extinguished before it could even cry out in despair." Hearing this, Tai Ta rubbed the back of his head, and doubtfully glanced at Jian Chen's indifferent face. In disbelief he asked, "Is that true? You're not lying to me?" Jian Chen laughed, "Of course it's true. Why would I lie to you?" Seeing Jian Chen's sincere expression, Tai Ta was beyond puzzled, and muttered, "Do such stupid magical beasts really exist, to actually give itself up to a weapon?" Chapter 35. Liang Shaola taking out the Black Panther's monster core. Jian Chen and Tai Ta continued on their trip to kill magical beasts. To easily kill a Class 1 magical beast while not having the strength of a saint was something that any new student would have said was an incomparably difficult task. Life-threatening dangers could happen at any time, but to Jian Chen and Tai Ta, it was almost as if they were playing a game. The second region was like a treasure trove of monster cores for those two. The day passed quickly and nightfall came. Both Jian Chen and Tai Ta found an open area in the forest to camp out in. Between them was a campfire with a fire that pulsed as it illuminated the pitch blackness. The two boys' shadows danced behind their backs, making their reflections seem like devils threatening each other. The darkness surrounded them from all four corners, and if they were to go outside the range of the bright fire, then they wouldn't even be able to see their own hands in front of their faces in the darkness. It wasn't that peaceful, however, as somewhere in the distant forest, a magical beast could be heard howling away. Just the sound of it would terrify anyone, and for someone who is absolutely scared already, the sound would cause them to be scared stiff. Tai Ta turned the monster core in his hand over the fire, causing the light of the fire to shine on it. One look at the two boys revealed that their clothes were not in great condition and were splattered with blood. The blood was all from magical beasts while their clothes had been cut open due to the thorny shrubbery. "Changyang Xiang Tian, you're really awesome. I didn't think that you would be able to wield a corroded iron rod to such an amazing degree. All of the magical beasts we fought against today were killed by you. It was only the initial viper from earlier that I managed to kill." Tai Ta exclaimed as he heaped praise onto Jian Chen. Jian Chen's face had a big smile on it. "I only took a chance when I saw one. If it weren't for you dealing out damage with your axe, then it would have been even harder to kill those magical beasts." Tai Ta laughed, his heart finally taking comfort in his words. "Changyang Xiang Tian, could you tell me, how is it that you're able to tell if we're near a magical beast or not?" Tai Ta was naturally very curious about this. The whole day he had been puzzling over it, but it was only now that he found the perfect time to ask. Jian Chen didn't bother to hide anything and instead pointed at his ear and head. "I used this and this." Tai Ta looked at Jian Chen point at his ears and head in a curious way before asking, "You use your ears to listen and your mind to think?" "You're only half correct." Jian Chen took the iron rod by his side and began to polish it on a small chunk of rock. Absent-mindedly responding, he said, "Aside from relying on my ears to listen, I use my spirit to feel my surroundings. However, this method would be too difficult for you to do." "Oh!" Tai Ta nodded his head in understanding while thinking it over in his head. Jian Chen felt the fine point of the iron rod before putting it down. Grabbing onto his space belt, he said, "Tai Ta, let us check out our earnings from today." Shaking his space belt, the stored monster cores began to fall out. One after another, monster cores started to drop out from the space belt, and gradually the spot in front of Jian Chen began to pile up with monster cores until it was a foot high. Tai Ta followed suit and started to shake his own space belt. In the end, a small mountain piled up in front of him as well. "I have 48 monster cores here." Jian Chen laughed. His profits for today had been huge. "I have 49 here, I've beat you by 1. Tai Ta was extremely happy. He had never seen this many cores before. This was a first for him, since he had never even seen a single monster core before. To Tai Ta, who was born in a common household, These monster cores had a huge price tag on them despite all of the cores being Class 1. For the first day to be this profitable, not bad. I don't know how many monster cores we'd need in order to be the ones with the most monster cores. After all, the prize is quite rich. A Class 4 monster core and a space ring. Even Jian Chen had been tempted by the prizes. He really wanted that Class 4 monster core. The energy inside would be many times stronger than a Class 1 monster core. At this moment, Jian Chen's eye suddenly grew dark as he whispered, "Quickly store all of the monster cores, people are coming." After saying that, he immediately started to store all of the cores into his belt and put it back on. Tai Ta moved quickly as well. The moment he heard Jian Chen start, he had already started to store all of the monster cores. Tai Ta had finished by the time Jian Chen did. After the two had stored their monster cores away, after a few nervous breaths, the distant grass moved to the side with a rustling sound as a very thin person came walking out. The moment the person saw both Tai Ta and Jian Chen sitting by a fire, a look of surprise came over their face before suddenly letting loose a cry of joy. It was a weak little lady holding onto a rice straw for support who came stumbling over. "I finally found someone. I finally found someone. I beg of you. Please don't leave me behind. I'm afraid, really afraid. The magical beasts want to eat me." The person's voice was fairly frantic and was full of panic. However, her voice was still gentle somehow. Hearing her, Jian Chen and Tai Ta then realized the person in front of them was a girl as the fire behind them illuminated her body, showing her Kargath Academy uniform to the both of them. However, the uniform had been cut open by the branches and thorns. Some parts of her body could already be seen underneath and even her underwear could be seen poking out. The uniform itself was muddy as if she had fallen multiple times. The girl's face was dirty with mud to the point where her appearance couldn't even be seen clearly. However, on her face could be seen evidence of her crying as she pleadingly looked at Jian Chen. Looking at the pitiful sight, there was nothing but helplessness reflected in her eyes. "Sit down." Jian Chen tried to make himself as kind as possible. Looking at her situation, he had guessed what type of trouble had taken place. In this environment, even the most reckless of boys would feel horrified, let alone a little girl. Seeing that the person was actually a pretty girl, Tai Ta's guard loosened. Carefully putting down the battle axe in his hands, he looked at the girl curiously. Jian Chen calmly looked at the young girl and asked, "Can you tell me what your name is?" My name is Liang Xiaolu," the young girl stuttered back. Seeing both Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's eyes flash, she could not help but feel fear, as well as some faint traces of concern and insecurity. "Why is a lady like you not with others? If you're so afraid, why would you walk through this forest alone? Just a few random sounds have even scared you to such an extent?" Tai Ta asked in a muffled voice. Liang Xiaolu looked at Tai Ta timidly before she said quietly, "I came here with a few friends at first, but unfortunately we came across a magical beast. That magical beast was quite strong, and my group of friends weren't able to beat it. Soon after most of us were injured and we all scattered to run away, but I got lost." Hearing this, Tai Ta began to choke on his own saliva before saying, "Even with a group you were unable to beat a Class 1 magical beast? How useless. Just Chongyang Xiang Tian and I have already killed over 100 magical beasts today." A proud look came over his face as he remembered that fact. "Golyalu." At that moment, a strange sound suddenly rang out. In an instant, Jian Chen and Tai Ta both directed their gazes to the origin of the sound. It turned out to be Liang Xiaoli's stomach, which at the moment, still would not stop grumbling loudly. "You must be hungry," Jian Chen smiled. "Yes." Liang Xiaolu nodded in embarrassment, and delicately said, "I haven't eaten all day." The corner of her eyes could not help but light up as she glanced at the bonfire, where the finely cooked golden magical beast meat was currently dripping with rich oils. She greedily inhaled its aroma, but the more she did this, the louder her stomach grumbled. Eventually, both Jian Chen and Tai Ta could only hear rumbling sounds in their ears. Jian Chen smiled. He picked up the skewer with the magical meat on it, and unafraid of the heat, directly used his hand to tear off a large chunk of the meat. Handing it over to Liang Xiaolu, he said, "Go on and eat this. Be careful, it's hot though." Liang Xiaolu twisted her hands, and ripped the corners of her clothes to wipe clean the dirt on her hands. Tenderly, she reached over to receive the magical beast meat. Once it had cooled down, she directly ate it with large mouthfuls, not caring to keep up her appearance in the least. Liang Xiaolu was probably starving, because after she quickly finished that large piece of meat, She still gazed at the remaining piece with a wistful look in her eyes. Jian Chen smiled, and ripped off another large chunk of magical beast meat. He handed it over to Liang Xiaolu and said, "Go ahead and eat this." Seeing the piece of magical beast meat that had placed in front of her, Liang Xiaolu hesitated for a bit, and in the end, still didn't reach out to receive it. Instead, she gazed at Jian Chen and Tai Ta and softly asked, "If I finish it, what will you guys eat?" Tai Ta laughed, "Don't worry, we still have another one left. Look under that tree." As he said this, Tai Ta extended a finger to point in the direction. Liang Xiaolu looked at where Tai Ta was pointing, and sure enough, she noticed that underneath a large tree nearby, an unknown magical beast had fallen to the ground. One of its legs had already disappeared, and the ground was covered with fresh blood marks. Staring at the magical beast's corpse, Liang Xiaolu swallowed hard and said, "You guys are really formidable. To think that the two of you alone could kill a Class 1 magical beast. Che! What does that mean?" Tai Ta said, completely unperturbed. The time stealthily flew by. Jian Chen and Tai Ta had finished eating, and were now preparing to rest. "Hey, where should I sleep?" Liang Xiaolu asked with difficulty. Jian Chen pointed at a large tree not too far away and said, "Go rest on top of that tree. That way, even if magical beasts try to attack in the middle of the night, you won't be harmed." "Ah, magical beasts still attack during the night?" Liang Xiaoli's face turned ashen at these words. Her eyes were filled with fear, and her whole body began to tremble. "Then what about you guys? Where would you guys go? You can't just leave me behind alone, otherwise I'll definitely be eaten by some savage magical beast," Liang Xiaolu asked in a panicked tone. She nervously glanced at Jian Chen and Tai Ta, as if afraid for her life if they ran away and abandoned her. Jian Chen internally sighed. He really couldn't do anything about the cowardly Liang Xiaolu. People like her who had been born and raised in noble families as a precious little girl had never experienced the stormy sea. From birth, she had grown up into a sheltered environment, so encountering any danger drove her heart and mind into disarray. "Don't worry, we won't go far. We're just going to rest in the other tree over there," Jian Chen said. Liang Xiaolu felt slightly comforted after hearing these words. However, traces of fear still remained in her heart, refusing to go away. That damned school, that damned headmaster. Why do they have to force everyone to attend this type of event for no reason at all? Isn't this just deliberately trying to send us to our deaths? Whenever she thought about how she had gotten into her current situation, Liang Xiaolu could not help but start cursing in anger. Eventually her words gradually began to turn into sobs. Chapter 36. A pack of wolves during the night. Jian Chen and Tai Ta sat under a tree cultivating. The torch by their side had long since burned out, and in a tree branch 5 or 6 meters above them was Liang Xiaolu. She nervously looked around whenever she heard the howl of a magical beast in the night. She wasn't able to sleep at all. Liang Xiaoli's bright eyes looked down at the cultivating pair, Jian Chen and Tai Ta, as if she was monitoring them. In her eyes, this was a matter of life or death. She did not want to see the two people she had found, after a long time of searching, to abandon her and lose her only type of protection. At that moment, a light breeze blew through the forest and through the tall grass. Meanwhile, the cross-legged Jian Chen suddenly opened his eyes. Immediately, his eyes grew bright as he stared deep into the tall grass, before standing up onto the ground with the iron rod in his hand. Liang Xiaolu was confused as she watched Jian Chen stand up. Not knowing what was happening, her heart was suddenly very agitated. "Hey, what's happening?" Liang Xiaolu whispered carefully. In this situation, she didn't dare use a loud voice to speak, for fear of attracting another magical beast. Jian Chen didn't answer her and instead turned to the still cultivating Tai Ta. "Tai Ta, wake up, some magical beasts are attacking." "Ah, what did you say? Magical beasts are attacking?" Liang Xiaolu became frightened, her face instantly draining of color. Thinking about what was about to happen, her whole body began to shake in fear. While Tai Ta was cultivating, he didn't dare immerse himself completely, so he still remained on guard while cultivating. Thus, when Jian Chen called for him, Tai Ta immediately woke from his cultivation state and stood up with his battle axe rested against his shoulder. "Chongyang Xiang Tian, where are the monsters?" he asked as he looked around. He couldn't see any footprints around them, or even hear a single sound. Jian Chen slowly turned his head as he looked around. "Tai Ta, this time, be careful. This time it isn't a single magical beast, but a group of them. A group. Tai Ta's face immediately changed from careless to surprise. Then it hardened into a ready expression. What? A group? It can't be. Hey guys, please don't scare me like that. Hiding in the trees, Liang Xiaolu pleaded with them. She would have rather heard a threat from Jian Chen than this. Jian Chen's eyebrows knitted together before lightly commanding the crying Liang Xiaolu. Could you please be quiet? Do you want to attract magical beasts from all over? Jian Chen's command proved to be extremely useful, as Liang Xiaolu immediately used her hand to clamp her mouth shut to make sure she didn't say anything. Chongyang Xiang Tian. How many magical beasts do you think there are? Tai Ta asked. A lot, 10 at the very least. They're all prepared to attack and already have us surrounded. Jian Chen's face was very grave. Tai Ta's expression grew hard as he heard Jian Chen. If it was just one magical beast, he wouldn't have been worried. 3 magical beasts and the both of them combined could take them on. But now that there were at least 10 of them, Tai Ta didn't dare to have a swelled head now. When Liang Xiaolu had heard Jian Chen, her already pale face had turned even paler, and her mind was racked with fear. Only one thought was occurring in her head. It's over, we're screwed. We're not going to survive this. The tall grass began to sway as a cyan-colored light appeared in front of them. There was one in every direction, with no less than 50 points of origin. As Jian Chen and Tai Ta looked on amazed, they realized the bright spots of light were actually the eyes of magical beasts, and there were at the very least 20 of them. This is a Class 1 magical beast blue wolf. Tai Ta, if you want to live, hurry and climb up a tree now, Jian Chen said as he looked at the 20 blue wolves from all 4 directions. Tai Ta glared in anger before brandishing his battle axe. With a heroic voice he said, Don't worry. Chongyang Xiang Tian, there are only 20 Class 1 magical beasts. I guarantee they won't take us down. The moment she heard that there were 20 wolves invading, Liang Xiaolu was practically scared to death. At this time, even if she believed in Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's strengths before, she would never believe that their strengths would be able to beat 20 magical beasts, as they hadn't even reached sainthood yet. Unless one of the school teachers were to come save them now, they wouldn't be able to escape alive. Teacher, where are you? Please come save us. Liang Xiaolu looked around in all directions as she pleaded for a teacher to come. She could only trust that the teachers would come to save them now, but it was a shame that there were so many magical beasts, so she was too scared to cry out too loudly. Just in case the magical beasts focused on her. The 20 blue wolves slowly walked towards Jian Chen and Tai Ta, their oily gazes staring attentively at them. It was only when their distance was less than 5 meters away that they stopped moving. Jian Chen and Tai Ta grabbed onto their respective weapons. Although they were surrounded by 20 magical beasts, neither of the two had a single expression of fear. Ew! Suddenly, a blue wolf started to cry out into the sky. Immediately afterwards, the 20 wolves surrounding them started to howl as well. Their howls filled the air as they began to overlap with each other, before turning into a large sound wave that targeted a wide area. Hearing the wolves howl, Liang Xiaoli's entire body slipped. Her body fell to the ground as she started to tremble. At this point, her face was entirely drained of blood, and had become a deathly pale shade. 5 kilometers away from Jian Chen, a middle-aged male dropped down onto a tree branch. When he heard the howls, his face changed. His previously closed eyes opened as he stared off towards the direction of the sound. Not good, that's a pack of blue wolves. Judging by the howls, there are at least 10 of them. It looks like someone has met up with danger then. The middle-aged man's face grew solemn as his hands touched the tree he was standing on. He jumped down from the tree before sprinting off towards the direction of the howls without stopping. I hope that I can make it. The middle-aged man was anxious, but he was already going at the fastest speed he could possibly go at. The magical beasts in the second area weren't that strong, but the opponents Jian Chen and Tai Ta were facing were Class 1 magical beast blue wolves. Their chances of success weren't looking well. At the same time, in 3 different places, 3 different people all heard the yell before putting down whatever was in their hands and quickly started to run towards the howl. The wolves' howl was the signal for the wolves to attack, as the 20 wolves suddenly rushed at Jian Chen and Tai Ta. Go die! Tai Ta snarled as he brought his battle axe up in preparation to strike. He swiped at a nearby wolf with his axe, slamming the axe into its stomach. The wolf cried out with an ear-piercing shriek. Pang! The blue wolf that charged at Tai Ta was immediately cut down by his battle axe's powerful attack, and it now sported a giant wound on its body. The wolf was sent flying away from the mighty swing. Despite it being a Class 1 magical beast, it was no match for Tai Ta's strength. Tai Ta brandished his 100-pound battle-axe with ease as if it wasn't heavy at all. Whenever a blue wolf approached, he would send it flying away. Thus, any wolf that got too close to him was sent flying, with a new wound on its body. However, the skin of a blue wolf was tough, so even Tai Ta couldn't kill one with ease. As the wolves approached him at the same time, Jian Chen's eyes instantly grew cold as he dashed forward. In a flash, he brought the sharpened iron rod through the throat of a nearby wolf. Pooh! With some resistance, the iron rod finally pierced through the wolf's hide and bore through the wolf's throat. He took out the rod and tilted his body to the side to dodge the attack of another wolf who jumped at him. The wolf who had its throat pierced by Jian Chen fell helplessly to the ground, as its 4 legs spasmed in its final death throes. It couldn't stand up on its legs no matter how much it tried, as bright red blood leaked out from its wound. The throat was the weak point for almost every single living thing, and magical beasts were no exception. Right now, since the blue wolf had its throat skewered, its life was quickly fading. Even though it was trying to avoid the temptation of death, its struggle would not last long. Jian Chen relied on the nimbleness of his body to weave in and out of the pack of wolves, and he used his iron rod to leave behind stab wounds wherever he attacked. Despite being surrounded by 10 wolves, Jian Chen had used his strange but unpredictable style of movement to dodge with ease. The sharp teeth and the claws of the wolves couldn't touch him at all, and whenever it had seemed like the wolves would be able to get him, Jian Chen moved out of the way just in time. The battle hadn't even lasted for more than a few deep breaths before 3 of the wolves had their throats pierced by Jian Chen. As the wolves lost blood, they stumbled to the ground in a final struggle to live, but after one final breath, they died on the ground. Many of the wolves had suffered from multiple wounds, but none of them were fatal, and were focused on the joints of the beasts. Jian Chen proceeded to travel in between the wolves as the iron rod in his hand continued to stab at them. Not only were his movements swift, but there was a certain grace to them. It was almost as if he was dancing instead of fighting for his life. On the other side, Tai Ta let loose a snarl and brought his 100-pound battle-axe down through the air, producing an after-image thanks to the speed. The few wolves surrounding him were continuously sent flying through the air with exceptionally terrifying wounds. Although the wounds were from Tai Ta's sharp battle-axe, to the blue wolves, these injuries would not threaten their lives at all. Although Tai Ta was looking quite powerful and majestic at this moment, he was not invincible. And with Jian Chen's success so far, Tai Ta's own achievements were nothing much. After all, ever since the start of the battle, Tai Ta had not yet been able to kill a single blue wolf. Chapter 37. Teacher's shock. A mere few seconds passed. Another wolf died by Jian Chen's hands, while countless others were being injured. The cowering Liang Shaoli didn't hear Tai Ta's or Jian Chen's screams of pain at all. All she could hear was the howling of the blue wolves mixed in with whimpers. Because of her curiosity, she fought her fear and looked down on the ground, and her eyes grew wide in shock. She couldn't believe that Jian Chen and Tai Ta were still fighting the blue wolves, and she was shocked speechless. Every single swing from Tai Ta's axe was capable of smashing a wolf into the air with ease. No wolf was able to get close to him because of that, and most of the blue wolves were covered with frightening wounds that had covered their entire bodies with blood. Jian Chen, on the other hand, was moving rapidly between the wolves and attacking them from every direction. Whenever he thrusted his iron rod forward, another wolf would be riddled with wounds. His movements were too fast for Liang Shaoli to follow. The only thing she could see was a constant blurs. She had never experienced such a hair-raising bloody spectacle like the one below, but on the outside, her face had already started to regain some color. However, her body had not yet stopped trembling. After all, it was her first time seeing such a bloody mess, and no matter who it was, a person wouldn't be able to take in a sight like this easily their first time. At that moment, a blue wolf took advantage of Tai Ta's lack of attention, and jumped at his shoulder. Using its strong teeth, it bit deeply down on his shoulder and blood started to flow freely from the wound. The acute pain caused Tai Ta's face to darken as he looked at the blue wolf biting at his shoulder. Tai Ta's eye blinked in pain as he looked at the blue wolf with a fierce glare. Dropping his battle-axe, his right hand grabbed onto the wolf's head, and with his monstrous strength, he ripped the wolf off his shoulder, leaving behind deep incisions in his skin. Tai Ta grabbed onto the wolf's snout with both hands, and the veins in his arms swelled up with his muscles. With a furious roar, his hands gripped onto the yelping wolf and tore its head from its body. At the same time, blood splattered everywhere onto Tai Ta, dyeing him blood red. Tai Ta's act of strength caused the surrounding wolves to cower in fear, as they watched Tai Ta hold onto the two halves of the wolf's carcass. But Tai Ta didn't plan to let the wolves get away. Dropping the body, he picked up his battle axe and sliced down onto another wolf's head. The wolf tilted its head and dodged Tai Ta's battle axe. Bringing its head up towards the sky, it let out a great howl before launching itself at him. Hearing the howl, all of the wolves had their fear dispelled, as they instantly charged at Tai Ta. Tai Ta sent a kick towards the abdomen of a wolf, sending it flying through the air. The sharp blade of his battle axe cut into the neck of the wolf. Leaving behind a trail of blood, the wolf flew backwards like a rocket. After his battle axe had chopped through the head of a wolf, Tai Ta stopped where he stood. He brandished his battle axe in a menacing way for the other wolves to see. Pang! A wolf was too late in dodging and was hit by Tai Ta's battle axe. The wolf was split in two as it gave one last final howl. After being injured, it looked as if Tai Ta became even stronger. In a flash, he had already killed 2 wolves. Jian Chen, on the other hand, was still wrestling fiercely with the wolves. Suddenly, a wolf jumped from above, down onto Jian Chen. Jian Chen immediately turned around and glared at the incoming wolf with his flashing eyes. The iron rod in his hand shot forth like lightning and stabbed deep into the wolf's abdomen, piercing its heart. The moment he felt the rod stop, he immediately pulled it out and then moved away from his position. The moment he left from his spot, the group of blue wolves immediately lunged at him. The wolf that had been skewered in the heart whimpered as it gave its final breath, and fell down to the ground, spasming before finally becoming still. The battle persisted for some time, and as time passed, the amount of blue wolves that had died by the hands of Jian Chen and Tai Ta grew larger and larger. Gradually, the pressure on the 2 boys reduced, as the number of blue wolves dwindled. Jian Chen pulled out his iron rod from another wolf's throat. He had already killed over 10 blue wolves, yet his clothes were relatively unstained by the blood. Jian Chen looked to Tai Ta only to see 7 or 8 blue wolves left. However, each of the 8 wolves were already bloody, as if they had been bathed in blood. His already ragged clothing was becoming even worse, and was almost like a strip of cloth now. His clothes were no longer protecting his body, and instead revealed his chest underneath. Even the trousers had rips in parts, with blood dripping from the wounds beneath it. Without any hesitation, Jian Chen rushed towards Tai Ta and immediately started to fight off the 8 wolves with his iron rod. Because Tai Ta had gave the wolves many heavy injuries in a long battle, the wolves were all exhausted beyond relief, so Jian Chen's job was relatively easy. Without expending much energy, he ended their lives by accurately piercing each of the wolves' throats. After the invasion of the pack of wolves, even Jian Chen couldn't help but breathe hard. Even though he was not weak at all, he had used up the majority of his energy to fight against the pack of wolves. Tai Ta let out a long sigh as he looked at the pile of dead bodies around him. On his face was a happy smile. Although they had just fought a long and hard battle, he didn't show a single trace of exhaustion. Instead, his fighting spirit was awakened. Chongyang Xiang Tian, let's kill the rest of the Class 1 magical beasts. Tai Ta laughed. In his lifetime, he had never killed a Class 1 magical beast before, so it was natural that he was excited. Jian Chen smiled as well before looking at the wounds on Tai Ta. You're hurt. How bad is it? Tai Ta looked down on his body to inspect his wounds before saying, it's no problem. Although the bites hurt, they're mostly superficial wounds. Hee, my skin has been thick since I was small, so regular beasts could never bite me before. Jian nodded his head in understanding with a thoughtful face. He knew about Tai Ta's strength and vitality firsthand. Tai Ta was even stronger than a steel bar, so the blue wolves must have been ferocious to bite through his skin. Ah, that's right. Chongyang Xiang Tian, are you hurt? Tai Ta asked with concern as he looked at Jian Chen. Jian Chen shook his head. Don't worry, the wolves didn't hurt me at all. He shifted his stare to the tall grass and said loudly, haven't you seen enough? How long do you plan on hiding there? Hearing Jian Chen, Tai Ta went blank for a second as he was puzzled by what Jian Chen was saying. But he soon figured it out and immediately grabbed onto his battle axe with both his hands. Who's hiding over? Hurry up and come out, otherwise I'll chop you in half. Tai Ta yelled. As Tai Ta spoke, the tall grass rustled before them as 4 figures leapt out in front of Tai Ta and Jian Chen. Seeing the 4 shadows jump out, Tai Ta immediately went on the defensive, while Jian Chen didn't move a muscle except for a small smile on his face. Although they couldn't see the appearances of the four due to the darkness, but Jian Chen had long since guessed their identities. When the four shadows reached 2 meters away from Jian Chen, they suddenly stopped. Jian Chen could finally see their faces clearly. 2 of them were middle-aged men while there was an elder and a 30-year-old female. All 4 of them had a look of astonishment and were stupefied as if they saw an inconceivable event. Honorable teachers, so it was you. Taita finally recognized the 4 people and cried out in surprise. The 4 people quickly regained their composure, but their eyes still revealed traces of shock. Chongyang Xiang Tian. No wonder there are rumors about you being able to beat a saint. I didn't think too much about it at first, but after seeing this, the rumors have to have some sort of truth to them. For a single person to use a corroded iron rod to kill dozens of Class 1 magical beasts, even saints who condense their saint weapons wouldn't be able to replicate this easily. The elder said with a laugh as he praised Jian Chen. Jian Chen laughed and said, "Honored teacher gives this one too much praise. My strength isn't as strong as you think. The wolves may have been Class 1 magical beasts, but their attack power wasn't that high. If I had came across a stronger Class 1 magical beast, then I'm afraid I would have struggled a lot more." Hearing this, the elder looked at Jian Chen appreciatively before looking at Tai Ta with a laugh. "Tai Ta, your strength is also very strong. It's no wonder the headmaster noticed you and took you in as an apprentice." Tia Ta scratched his head with a modest smile, but he didn't know what to say in response to that. "Elder Yun, it would appear that we came here for nothing. These 2 are absolutely abnormal in strength. Nothing in the second region would be a match for them," said the 30-year-old woman. The other 3 bitterly smiled as they listened to her. When they had heard the howls of the wolves, they naturally knew that a student was in danger. For that reason alone they had all rushed towards the howls at the fastest speed possible to rescue them. On the way, each one of them prayed that the students would be able to hold on for as long as possible, but when they had arrived, they were subjected to an inconceivable sight. 2 students who weren't at the saint level had been able to fend off 20 or so blue wolves without trouble. In the end, they had been able to slaughter all 20 of them, and none of the 4 could believe their eyes at this end result. Chapter 38. Liang Xiaolu. Oh, by the way, Chongyang Xiang Tian, how did you detect us? A middle-aged man asked, his tone full of curiosity. The other 3 teachers were curious to know as well as they stared at Jian Chen. The 4 of them were extremely interested in knowing how they were detected while hiding in the tall grass because they had not made a single sound or made any movement, so there was no way that they would have been noticed by Jian Chen. Jian Chen laughed and said, "I had found out the moment the honorable teachers arrived." "What? You found out the moment we arrived? How is that possible?" The woman cried out in disbelief. The other 3 people couldn't believe what Jian Chen said either. Jian Chen opened his mouth. "While I was fighting the pack of wolves, I was still paying attention to my surroundings. Otherwise, we might have been subjected to random attacks from someone else. How would I dare lose track of what was happening around me at such a crucial point?" Hearing this, the 4 teachers nodded, approving of what Jian Chen had just said. Jian Chen continued to explain, "The honorable teachers didn't make a single sound at all, but when you arrived I saw a bunch of obvious movements, so I found out since the very beginning." Hearing this, the 4 people realized their mistakes as the elder sighed in admiration. "Amazing, just amazing. Chongyang Xiang Tian, I really have no other choice but to admire you. And to think that when I was your age, I was nowhere near the level you are now." The elder then paused before saying, "Since you students aren't in any danger, then we'll take our leave now. After all, there are still students to save." Although the elder had said that, he looked as if he was reluctant to leave. "Please wait." Jian Chen suddenly cried out towards the 4 teachers. Pointing at Liang Xiaolu who was still hiding in the tree, he said, "Honored teacher, could you please help escort this student out? She doesn't have the courage to stay here any longer." The teacher frowned as he thought about it. This won't be a problem, but even if she hands over 2 Class 1 monster cores, this will still be considered as a loss. After all, she didn't stay here for all 3 days. "No, I won't leave. I'll definitely stay here for all 3 days," Liang Xiaolu said from the treetop as she dropped 5 or 6 meters down onto the ground. In one long stride she went over to where Jian Chen was. "Hey, these 4 teachers can take you out of this forest so you won't have to worry about magical beasts hurting you. Why don't you want to go home?" Tai Ta was rather discontent, since Liang Xiaolu was really too cowardly. The moment she saw a magical beast she cried out loud. This really annoyed Tia Ta. Liang Xiaolu looked at Tai Ta timidly and whispered, I don't want to go. Could it be you're no longer afraid of magical beasts? Tai Ta asked curiously. I am. So you're scared after all, then why don't you want to get out of here? Because you two are still here. With such a straightforward answer, Tai Ta couldn't find a response. Jian Chen looked at Liang Xiaolu helplessly before trying to persuade her. Liang Xiaolu, you should go with the teachers, the magical beasts in this forest are many, and so there's no guarantee that we can protect you. Liang Xiaoli's face became miserable as she realized that she would need to depend on Jian Chen. Imploring, she said, Senior, please let me go with you. This was my first time seeing a magical beast and the first time I've been here. That's why I was scared initially. But I guarantee you, the next time we come across a magical beast, I won't cry out loud. After experiencing Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's strengths, Liang Xiaolu wouldn't have to worry about getting into any trouble with those two around. Plus, Liang Xiaolu had clearly that the four teachers all said that the second region of the forest had nothing that they couldn't handle. So with such good protection, there was no way she would give up that easily. Jian Chen suddenly felt a headache coming. Liang Xiaolu was a pampered noble since birth, so she would definitely be a burden to them. When they battled any magical beasts in the future, they would have to look after her as well. Chongyang Xiang Tian, with you and Tai Ta, there are no magical beasts in the second region that can pose a threat to you. So you might as well take her along. Students should look out for one another. And besides, for you too, this shouldn't even be considered a test anymore. Laughed the middle-aged woman. Jian Chen inwardly sighed in exasperation. Since even the teachers wanted Liang Xiaolu to tag along, he couldn't find any reasons to object. Although Jian Chen was giving in, Tai Ta was still not satisfied, but he didn't say anything. After this first day, he had already started to see Jian Chen as the pillar of the team. Whatever his decision was, Tai Ta would not object to it. Jian Chen's mind was better at strategy, and he had more experience dealing with beasts than Tai Ta's. So it could be said that no matter what, Tai Ta would concede to Jian Chen. After the four teachers left, Jian Chen and Tai Ta didn't pay attention to Liang Xiaolu and instead went to the dead bodies of the blue wolves. Since it was over 20 Class 1 monster cores, they wouldn't dare to squander this. Because the monster cores of the blue wolves were in their heads, Tai Ta and Jian Chen were trying to find a way to extract them. They definitely needed to strike and break at the part of the head where the monster core was. So Liang Xiaoli's face went pale as she observed them. Perhaps Liang Xiaolu had changed only slightly. It was almost as if she no longer felt out of her league. With great difficulty, she was able to quell the cowardly nature within her, as she diligently watched Jian Chen and Tai Ta work at extracting the cores. It was almost as if she was learning from the experience. The night passed quickly and peacefully after the initial Blue Wolves raid. As the dawn sun slowly rose over the edge of the horizon, the cross-legged Jian Chen finished his cultivation and stood up to stretch. Just as Jian Chen stood up, he heard Tai Ta start to awaken as well. He followed Jian Chen up, and although the two were in the middle of cultivating, they were still aware of their surroundings. They had put up a guard while cultivating, and as long as the wind blew through the tall grass, then the pair would be able to track anyone. Tai Ta, go find some dry branches for the fire. I'll go fetch the magical beast meat. It's about time we prepare some breakfast, Jian Chen said. Oh. Without any objects, Tai Ta turned around and entered the forest to search for some dry firewood. Soon after, Tai Ta carried over a pile of dry firewood. At the same time, Jian Chen had prepared a huge chunk of bloody magical beast meat from the blue wolves that had been killed by them last night. Since there were no sources of water in the area, the magical beast meat was not washed. Instead, it was directly skewered with some sticks, and was placed above the bonfire to begin roasting. Not long after, the roasted magical beast meat began to emit a fragrant aroma. Although it did not have any spices, the quality of the magical beast meat was originally high. Moreover, the higher the class of the magical beast, the more delicious its meat would taste, and the more beneficial it was to the body. It was said that a Class 5 magical beast's meat could even boost one's strength. Perhaps because she could smell the magical beast meat's fragrance, Liang Xiaolu awoke from her nap on top of the tree, and jumped down. The 5 to 6 meter height was nothing to Liang Xiaolu, who had reached the 8th Saint Force layer. Wah! It smells so good. Liang Xiaolu bounced over to the bonfire, and seeing the golden magical beast meat dripping in rich oils, she could not help but swallow hard. Although she had eaten many exotic delicacies, she had never eaten wild game like this before. After all, eating the same type of meat for so long, one would obviously think of anything else as more appetizing, even if it was just some cabbage. Tai Ta shot a dissatisfied glance at Liang Xiaolu, and murmured in a quiet voice, "Last night you were crying so loudly. Now you've forgotten about it all so quickly. I hope that when we encounter more magical beasts later, you won't start wailing again." Tai Ta's voice was extremely soft and unclear. Most likely, aside from himself, nobody would have been able to clearly hear what he had whispered, even Jian Chen. Liang Xiaolu looked at Tai Ta in curiosity. "Tai Ta, what are you saying?" Last night, the 4 teachers had called out Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's names, so Liang Xiaolu had already learned their identities. "Ah, nothing." Tai Ta waved his hands as if he was feeling guilty for something. Liang Xiaolu didn't pay any mind to it. She gazed at Jian Chen and Tai Ta and smiled. "No wonder you two are so powerful that you can kill 20 Class 1 magical beasts. It turns out that you two are actually Tai Ta and Chongyang Xiang Tian. The fact that I was able to meet you two was really great luck." The current Liang Xiaolu seemed to be an entirely different person from the person yesterday evening. After only a single night, she seemed to already have pushed yesterday's events to the back of her mind. Now, her face didn't show a single trace of fear and dread from the thought of magical beasts. Jian Chen lifted the well-cooked magical beast meat, and then ripped of a section, throwing it over to Liang Xiaolu, asking, "There are a lot of magical beasts in this forest. Moreover, if we don't stay for 3 more days, then we definitely cannot leave. Aren't you afraid?" Liang Xiaolu accepted the piece of magical beast meat, and while she lightly chewed it, she said, "Although I'm still scared, I believe that I will eventually get used to it. In addition, the 2 of you are not much older than me, yet you both faced those fierce blue wolves last night without a trace of fear. The 2 of you even managed to slaughter all of them. This is much more impressive than those other boys." "Humph, those boys were so useless. The 5 of them together couldn't defeat a single magical beast. In the end, their incompetence forced me to get separated from my sisters." Liang Xiaolu suddenly stood up, and loudly declared, "I've decided now. I will definitely use these next 2 days to properly learn from you 2 seniors." Hearing this, Jian Chen inwardly nodded to himself. Liang Xiaoli's statement had already gained Jian Chen's approval. Although she was timid, and was extremely afraid of magical beasts, that wasn't important. The most important factor was she was willing to change her ways, and to learn more. After all, nobody was born with the ability to do and understand everything. All knowledge retained is a result of one going out to learn it. Of course, Jian Chen was an exception. On the other hand, Liang Xiaolu was born as the eldest daughter in a noble household. She had been spoiled since she was young, and had grown up in a sheltered environment. Obviously, she had never experienced any hardships. Thus, it was to be expected that she would inevitably be frightened during her first encounter with a savage magical beast. After all, this was the equivalent to an average person meeting a ghost for the first time. Anyone would feel fear. Chapter 39. Plans. After eating breakfast, Jian Chen and Tai Ta both grabbed their respective weapons before continuing on with their journey. However, trailing behind them was the dainty Liang Xiaolu, who was empty-handed. She looked around herself carefully due to her own weapon being long gone after she had been separated from her group and chased through the forest. Tai Ta lifted his battle-axe. His clothes were already swapped out. This time, he was wearing blue wolf leather along with some grassroot to hold it together. His academy uniform was long since torn apart from yesterday's battle to the point where he couldn't wear it anymore. In the blink of an eye, another day came and went. By looking at the profits, they weren't as good as the first day, but they weren't bad either. In total, they had killed 70 magical beasts, making Liang Xiaolu feel shocked. On this second day, Liang Xiaolu went through a major change. Ever since the spectacle with the blue wolves, her entire personality had transformed. At the very least, whenever she saw a magical beast, she wouldn't scream in terror anymore. And whenever Tai Ta and Jian Chen would slaughter any enemy magical beast, she didn't even flinch at the sight of the blood. She was slowly starting to adapt to her situation. Not only that, but in the same day, she had unexpectedly learned much about the dangers of the forest and gained knowledge pertaining to them. Her capacity for learning was extremely high, and even Jian Chen couldn't help but admire it. Of course, what was important was looking at her talent for cultivation, since in the Tianyuan continent, one's own strength was what dictated who they were over everything else. Liang Xiaolu was also extraordinarily smart. Although she wasn't very strong, she definitely didn't cause trouble for Tai Ta or Jian Chen, nor was she a burden like the two had previously thought she would be. She would stay behind the two, and whenever the two fought against a magical beast, she would stand far away so that she wouldn't get caught up in it. After that day, both Jian Chen or Tai Ta had a new levels of respect for Liang Xiaolu, and no longer belittled her in their hearts. Later that night, the three of them sat by the campfire to count the pile of monster cores. Dear seniors, have you two really not condensed your saint weapons and become saints yet? Liang Xiaolu asked as she stared at them with her bright eyes. What a strange question. Her clothes were already filled with holes from the trees and thorns that stabbed and cut into her, and her pretty face resembled a kitty from the whisker-like cuts. Since there were no water sources, she had to rely on drinking the blood of the magical beasts in order to stave off the thirst, and so there was no way she could wash off the filth on her face. If we were saints, why would I be using this axe? Tai Ta looked at his bundled up and heavily nicked battle axe with no small amount of dissatisfaction. After continued usage with Tai Ta's strength, the giant battle axe had finally worn out. The previously sharp edge was now becoming blunt after use. Even the previously sharp point on Jian Chen's corroded iron rod had nearly become flat. Liang Xiaoli's face was full of admiration as she stared at the two. You two are really amazing. You're not even at the saint level yet and you can easily kill class 1 magical beasts. In my opinion, once you reach the saint level, you will be able to kill class 2 magical beasts with ease. Jian Chen shook his head. How would it be easy? These are magical beasts that were bred by the academy, so they have weak attack power. When we meet magical beasts with a stronger attack, then we will definitely have a harder time with it. Liang Xiaolu nodded her head and said grimly, that's right. I've heard my dad say before that there are some amazing class 1 magical beasts that can spit out some low-level spells with a high amount of attack power. They're so strong that some normal saints aren't powerful enough to beat them. Jian Chen looked at Tai Ta, who was focusing on the campfire. Tai Ta, right now there isn't anything in the second region that could stand a chance against us, so I want to move to the third region. How do you feel about that? Tai Ta gave it some thought before saying, right, the second region is already very easy for us since there isn't a challenge anymore. Okay then, Chongyang Xiang Tian, I'll enter the third region with you. It's time to see how strong the class 2 magical beasts really are. Hearing the two talk, Liang Xiaolu, who was sitting nearby, said, it can't be. You two haven't reached the saint level and you still want to enter the third region to fight class 2 magical beasts? Without a saint weapon, there's no guarantee of survival, and the skin of a class 2 magical beast is stronger than that of class 1 magical beasts, so it's even tougher. You two only have a worn battle axe and corroded iron rod, so that'll make killing even harder. Not only that, but the environment in the third region isn't good at all. I've heard that there's even a marsh filled with poisonous vipers inside. There's a high chance you of losing your lives in the dangerous third region. Tai Ta laughed as he looked at my weapon. That's right, Chongyang Xiangtian, over these past 2 days, our weapons have been in constant use, and my battle axe has lost its sharpness. Even your own iron rod is almost flat, so it would be hard to kill class 2 magical beasts. Jian Chen laughed. There's no rush, there are still plenty of students in the second region. We still haven't met with other students because we're still far away from them. We should return tomorrow, and exchange monster cores for weapons, since the students would be definitely interested. Yeah, that's a good idea, Tai Ta nodded in agreement. Jian Chen continued, Liang Xiaolu, let's split up tomorrow. If you're with other students, then you should be able to safely pass through your last day. After all, anyone who has been able to endure 2 days here must have some real skills. Liang Xiaolu nodded wordlessly. Her expression was a bit disappointed. After all, she also knew of the third region's dangers. She was unsure if Jian Chen and Tai Ta would be able to go against those magical beasts. If she continued along with them, even if Jian Chen and Tai Ta agreed to let her accompany them, she would only be a baggage that would hold them down. The night passed without incident. Soon, the sky began to brighten. Jian Chen and Tai Ta finished their night of cultivation, and began to prepare breakfast. After the 3 of them had finished eating, the sun had already gradually began to rise into the sky. They continued on their way. However, this time, they had begun walking back in the direction they had come from. After 2 days of battles, The two boys had already become extremely skilled at sensing and avoiding danger, so it didn't take long for them to arrive at their destination. Under a large tree, 9 students in tattered clothing were tiredly sitting underneath, catching their breaths. They were a group of commoners mixed with some nobles. At the moment, their clothes were ripped all over the place, with some dried-out bloodstains covering them as well. They also sported injuries on their bodies, and not far from them was a carcass of a magical beast lying on the ground. Everyone, hold on for just a bit longer. This is already the last day. After this day ends, we can leave, a commoner student breathlessly said. It's unfortunate that we don't have enough magic stones yet. We still need 5 more. It looks like we still have to slaughter 5 more magical beasts to pass, said a young noble. Originally, the nobles hadn't been willing to stay together with the commoners, but after encountering the savage magical beast, they were immediately scared out of their wits. Faced with life or death, who would care about people's statuses? Protecting oneself was the greater priority. Thus, the few nobles had gradually decided to join the commoner students. After all, everyone knew there was strength in numbers. In addition, perhaps because the commoners had been raised in harsher environments, they did not show any signs of retreating when faced with savage magical beasts. This changed the arrogant nobles' views of the commoners. Eventually, they had all slowly become friends. Moreover, after constantly fighting against magical beasts, the 9 of them had become more comfortable working together. Eventually, they had formed an unexpected bond that held all of them together with close relationships. At that moment, there was a movement in the grass off in the distance. Everyone, be careful. A magical beast is attacking. A student immediately reacted and loudly warned the others. Instantly, the 9 of them stood up and stared with wary expressions towards the direction the sound had come from. The grass swayed vigorously. Eventually, they saw a figure wearing beast leather swinging a large hatchet around, cutting down the weeds in his way. Right after the group noticed him, they saw that there were 2 other figures following behind him as well. Although their clothes were tattered, it was obvious that they were all wearing the Kargath Academy uniforms. Perhaps because they had been traveling through the lush forest for so long, but their faces were dark, and they had random twigs in their hair. Only their general facial structures could be seen. Their appearances were already indistinguishable. Realizing that the figures were people and not magical beasts, the 9 students immediately sighed in relief, and smiles slowly spread across their faces. At this point, if they could get those new people to join them, then the overall strength of their group would definitely rise. Hunting magical beasts would be much easier. In addition, all of them were smart enough to realize that these people who had stayed here for 3 days must be quite powerful. Of course, these 3 people were Jian Chen, Tai Ta, and Liang Xiaolu. After backtracking for half a day, they had finally discovered a group of people. Since it was already the last of the 3 days, there weren't many people remaining in the forest. Most of them had already ran away, and so there were very few students that were still here. When Liang Xiaoli's gaze rested on a gorgeous girl standing amongst the group of 9, she showed a pleasantly surprised expression. "Ah, Li Sha!" Liang Xiaolu shouted out with an extremely excited voice, as she immediately flew towards the gorgeous girl. Hearing a slightly familiar voice, the girl blinked her large shining eyes, and gazed at Liang Xiaolu, who was running towards her, in slight confusion. Currently, Liang Xiaoli's face was covered with quite a bit of dirt, making her look like a calico cat. Even if this girl called Li Sha did know Liang Xiaolu well, it was difficult for her to recognize Liang Xiaolu with her current appearance. Liang Xiaolu rushed to the girl, and excitedly hugged her tightly. In a tone filled with joy, she said, "Li Sha, I hadn't imagined that I would have been able to see you again here. I thought you had already left the forest." Hearing the overly familiar voice, the girl named Li Sha finally recognized who Liang Xiaolu was. Pleasantly surprised, she said, You're Xiaolu." Chapter 40. Exchanging Weapons/P. That's right, Li Sha. "I'm Xiaolu," Liang Xiaolu spoke, her voice dripping with emotion as she confirmed her friend's words. "Xiaolu, it really is you, that's great. I thought that you had already escaped from this place. I never would have imagined that I would see you here." Li Sha, the girl in front of Liang Xiaolu, was just as happy, and continued to hug her once thought-to-be lost friend. The 2 girls joined in a tight embrace. Li Sha was laughing out loud. "Liang Xiaolu, I didn't think we'd be able to meet again after losing each other in the forest. This really makes me happy." "Hello," said a youth wearing clothing as tattered as the other two. "I'm so glad to have met the two of you here. How should I put this? I'm not sure if you want, but would you be willing to join our group? If you do, I can certainly guarantee that together our group will be much stronger and consequently will make hunting magical beasts a lot easier. And besides, danger lurks around every corner in these woods. It'd be better if we worked together." His tone was first likable as he walked up to Jian Chen and Tai Ta, but as soon as he saw that Jian Chen's clothes were entirely crimson with fresh blood, he couldn't help but express shock. The youth seriously doubted that the blood was all from Jian Chen, because anyone who lost that much blood would definitely be beyond weak. There was no way such a person could firmly stand there, with such a sharp look. Jian Chen shook his head, politely refusing, "I'm sorry, but we were just planning to leave this place, so we cannot join your group." The youth had an expression of regret on his face. However, he still reconciled. "My two fellow students, although the magical beasts here are quite formidable, we have strength in numbers. As long as everyone is willing to work together, even if we meet two magical beasts at once, they definitely won't pose any threat. If everyone hands over 2 Class 1 magic stones, I believe that we will soon gather enough." The youth continued to press the issue. His gaze was quite sharp, and it was obvious that he had already realized that Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's strengths were above average. "We really do not have any other options. The two of us have already decided to leave here, so we cannot join your group. Please forgive us." In order to reciprocate the formal request, Jian Chen's tone was just as amiable. Hearing that Jian Chen and Tai Ta were set on leaving, the youth could not help but be disappointed. He really could not understand why, although only 1 out of the 3 days was remaining, the two people refused to stay. As long as they paid up 2 Class 1 magic stones, they'd be able to successfully join. Yet, Jian Chen and Tai Ta still chose to leave the area. Could it be that the two of them really wanted to pass up such an opportunity? The youth thought that Jian Chen and Tai Ta had given up and wanted to leave the forest. He couldn't have ever imagined that their leaving actually meant leaving the second region to enter the third region, not actually leaving the forest. At that moment, Tai Ta glanced at the battle axe that one of the students was holding. His eyes lit up in happiness, and he directly walked over to the student with an intrepid air, and asked in a muffled voice, "Hey, if I give you 2 Class 1 magic stones, will you trade your battle axe for them?" Asking this, Tai Ta pulled out the battle axe on his back with one hand, and used his other hand to retrieve from his space belt 2 Class 1 magic stones that were still covered in fresh blood. It was at that moment that the group of people realized that the large battle axe in Tai Ta's hands was covered in fresh blood. The entire surface had been dyed crimson. The appearance alone was beyond shocking. It looked as if it was a murder weapon that had been constantly doused by blood. What was even more disbelieving was that the battle axe, made of firm metal as hard as steel, had already been completely riddled with cracks. Moreover, some parts of the blade were even bent. Most people would not be able to believe this sight. They had all assumed that when Tai Ta had chosen his weapon, it had been like this from the beginning. There was no way they could have imagined that all of the axe's damages had been caused by Tai Ta himself. The student with the intrepid air looked at the beaten-up axe in front of him, which was so red that it looked like it had been made from blood, and was at a loss for a moment. When the other students heard Tai Ta's request, their eyes immediately lit up, and looked at the intrepid student with looks of envy, as if they were about to offer up their own weapons to trade with Tai Ta. "My fellow student, I can exchange this sword of mine with you." A student carrying a giant one-handed sword walked over to Tai Ta and said with a smile. Hearing, Tai Ta looked down at the battle axe that was in his grip, shook his head and spoke. "No need, I still prefer to use the battle axe." Hearing this, the male suddenly had a face full of disappointment. At this moment, getting 2 Class 1 magic stones was more important than anything else. Not to mention him, if the others could, they would also be willing to trade their weapons to Tai Ta for 2 Class 1 magic stones. Even if their weapons were worth more than 2 Class 1 magic stones, they would still not hesitate. The tall and sturdy male was not dumb. After considering it for a bit, he happily handed over his battle axe to fulfill the exchange. Who would be willing to refuse such a profitable exchange? After the exchange was completed, the group of people began to look at Tai Ta with a different light. A few of the smarter students had already connected the battle axe's battered state to the possibility that Tai Ta had caused it. From this point, they could directly confirm Tai Ta's extraordinary strength. Otherwise, why else would he just casually hand over 2 Class 1 magic stones? This place wasn't like outside. Before entering the forest, The school administration had already confiscated any devices the students had. They had even patted the students' bodies down to thoroughly check. There was absolutely no way the magic stone could have been brought in from the outside. The only way that magic stones could be gained inside the forest was to hunt magical beasts. However, there was just one thing the people couldn't understand. If Tai Ta and Jian Chen had the strength to hunt magical beasts, why didn't they want to stay in the forest for all 3 days? After all, the Academy's rules clearly dictated that they could only pass if they stayed for 3 days and paid up 2 Class 1 magic stones. If only one was fulfilled, they wouldn't pass. Could it be that they don't care about the rewards? Or perhaps they had lied about leaving, and actually just didn't want to kill magical beasts together with a few of us? Everyone could not help but think of these possibilities. When considering these thoughts, a few of the people immediately began to gaze at Jian Chen and Tai Ta with expressions of discontent. Jian Chen did not pay any mind to their expressions. He looked at the Liang Xiaolu and the girl she was hugging, and said, "Liang Xiaolu, since you found your friend now, why don't you just stick with this group? They have more people too." Liang Xiaolu slowly separated from the girl, and looked back at Jian Chen and Tai Ta. She nodded. "Then you two have to be careful." Afterwards, Tai Ta and Jian Chen didn't bother wasting any time, and immediately left the area. After the two of them had left, the girl called Li Sha asked in a resentful tone, "Xiaolu, who are they? They're so arrogant that they don't even think they should be with us." "Li Sha, you're mistaken. It's not that they don't want to be together with you guys. They really do want to leave here." Liang Xiaolu explained. "That can't be." Li Sha exclaimed in disbelief. "Li Sha, the fact that they could casually give away a Class 1 magic stone means that the two of them have the strength to kill magical beasts. Plus, when they were trading the 2 magical stones away for the weapon, it was obvious that they were planning on continuing to fight. How could they possibly be leaving this place?" "That's right, Xiaolu, you've been tricked by them," a youth standing on the side added. Liang Xiaolu smiled. "They're definitely leaving this place, but they didn't explain it clearly to you guys. They want to leave the 2nd region, and move on to the 3rd region to hunt the Class 2 magical beasts." "What? Liang Xiaolu, what kind of joke are you trying to pull? It's impossible for the two of them to go to the 3rd region to hunt Class 2 magical beasts. Could it be that their strengths have already reached Saint level? But that can't be right either. If they had reached the Saint level, then there would be no need to change weapons. Those two are really reckless, to want to go to the 3rd region. They're definitely seeking death." Immediately following Liang Xiaoli's words, the group of people immediately broke into chaos as they began to discuss in a frenzy amongst each other. None of them thought that Jian Chen and Tai Ta would be able to survive the 3rd region. Li Sha pulled at Liang Xiaoli's hands, and in a clearly disbelieving tone, she asked, "Xiaolu, they aren't really crazy enough to run over to the 3rd region, right?" Liang Xiaolu nodded. "That's right, they really did go to the 3rd region. Li Sha, you cannot underestimate the two of them. They're really formidable," Liang Xiaolu said with conviction. "Could it be that the two of them really are saints?" Li Sha asked in shock. The school administration had clearly declared that all students that were saints had to enter the 3rd region. There was no way they could have appeared in the 2nd region. Liang Xiaolu shook her head. "No, their powers haven't reached saint level yet, because they still haven't condensed their saint weapons." Hearing this, Li Sha's shock grew even more pronounced. Without reaching saint level, surviving in the 2nd region was already difficult enough, let alone being in the 3rd region. After all, the magical beasts in the 3rd region were Class 2 magical beasts, which weren't any small amount stronger than Class 1 magical beasts. The two classes could not even be compared. Li Sha and Liang Xiaolu were close friends. Therefore, Liang Xiaolu didn't feel the need to hide anything from Li Sha. In a soft voice she said, "Li Sha, I'll just tell you this. Yesterday, I personally witnessed the two of them kill 70+ magical beasts by themselves." Li Sha was beyond shocked by this, as she exclaimed, "What? Xiaolu, are you joking? The two of them killed 70+ magical beasts by themselves in one day?" Li Sha was so astonished that she couldn't contain her voice. She had gradually become louder and louder, until the other 8 people were able to hear her quite clearly. In that instant, all of their expressions changed at the thought of Jian Chen and Tai Ta achieving what Liang Xiaolu had said, and their expressions were beyond disbelief. "Li Sha, what did you say? Which 2 people were able to kill 70+ Class 1 magical beasts in a day?" a youth asked. He could not accept the possibility that the two people were actually Jian Chen and Tai Ta, whom they had just met. Li Sha tried to calm her breathing, and grasped at her chest before pointing to Liang Xiaolu. In a trembling voice she said. Xiaolu said that she personally witnessed the two people just now kill 70+ magical beasts in one day. Li Sha's tone reflected the fact that she thought such a possibility was inconceivable. Chapter 41. Flaming Cloud Beast/P. It can't be, Liang Xiaolu, what you're saying is ridiculous. Those two aren't even saints yet. To think they could kill over 70 magical beasts in a day? That's impossible. A youth with a pike said incredulously. That's right. It's too ridiculous. Even a saint wouldn't cut it. I think even a great saint wouldn't be able to kill that many Class 1 magical beasts in a single day, let alone half. I doubt their saint force is that unlimited. A bow-wielding girl said with doubt. At that moment, the youth that had invited Jian Chen and Tai Ta into the group said, Liang Xiaolu, do you know who they are? When did our Kargath Academy have such amazing people in it? They aren't saints, but to easily defeat Class 1 magical beasts? Just who are they? Saying this, he seemed to have immediately realized something, as his face rapidly changed colors. Liang Xiaoli's face looked proud as if she had done something honorable. With a laid-back tone she said, I can tell you this. The one that just traded you a monster core for your battle axe was the one that set the academy abuzz. Tai Ta, the headmaster's apprentice. The other person is the freshman ruler of the annual freshman competition. Chongyang Xiang Tian. Everyone cried out in alarm before talking amongst themselves in excitement. So it was those two abnormal people. No wonder their strength was that strong. It can't be, it said that Tai Ta fought Lord Cheng to a standstill at the library. That Chongyang Xiang Tian was the one who beat the Saint Ka Di Yun in an intense duel. I was there watching the fight. Chongyang Xiang Tian's strength was really amazing. I heard that outside the library, the middle-ranked Saint Luo Jian wasn't able to deal with Chongyang Xiang Tian, and was even forced to use his saint weapon in the end. Without the burden of having Liang Xiaolu anymore, Tai Ta and Jian Chen's speed had risen exponentially, and so the two soon reached the third region. When they first entered the third region, they initially saw no difference in the two regions. But the further they advanced, the more hellish it became. Compared to the third region, the second region could be called a paradise. There were all sorts of magical beasts in the forest, and the land was full of swamps, so if one wasn't careful, they would find themselves stuck deep inside the waters. However, most of the swamps were man-made, so they weren't too deep. Otherwise, if no one came to rescue them, they wouldn't be able to escape with their lives. Perhaps it was because of the ground, but there wasn't much grass in the third region, so line of sight was much better than the second region. Jian Chen and Tai Ta cautiously trekked through the swamplands with a small amount of powder on them. This type of powder was a type of repellent that would prevent insects from biting them. Chongyang Xiang Tian, it seems like you're familiar with the forest. Could it be you've been here before? How could you be this amazing? Tai Ta said, while looking at the layer of green dust on his body. Jian Chen chuckled and said, I read up a lot of books in the library about various places, so my understanding of the forests is relatively high. Ah, no wonder. Tai Ta realized. Right after Tai Ta spoke, Jian Chen's face stilled before becoming serious. At the same time, the ground began to shake, as if an earthquake was occurring. But before Jian Chen could say anything, Tai Ta had already sprung into action, his new battle axe coming to rest in both his hands. Jian Chen glanced towards his left and spoke cautiously. Tai Ta, be careful. This time it looks like we've come across a large magical beast. Yeah. Tai Ta nodded his head as the expression on his face grew solemn. Because they were in the third region, this wasn't a Class 1 magical beast, but a Class 2 magical beast that was stronger than a Class 1 magical beast by many times over. It could fight against a great saint on even footing. Although its attack power wasn't all that strong yet, its strength still couldn't be underestimated. As the two of them nervously looked around, the magical beast finally came into view. Its entire body had red fur, and it spanned 3 meters tall and 5 meters wide. Protruding from its mouth, it had 2 long tusks that looked as if they could penetrate through muscle with ease. If it weren't for the fact that the magical beast had a short nose, then Jian Chen would have thought that this was an animal that he had met in his previous world, the elephant. But this magical beast was a lot bigger than the elephant. Tai Ta, be careful. This is the Class 2 magical beast, the Flaming Cloud Beast. It can spit out fire from its mouth and is quite hard to deal with. Jian Chen uttered the magical beast's name. Because he had read so many books in the library, he could recognize most magical beasts, and even knew of some of their special abilities. Tai Ta only nodded, as he wordlessly focused all of his attention on the flaming cloud beast, ready to strike at any moment. Ho! The gigantic flaming cloud beast roared as it started to move each of its 4 hooves towards Jian Chen and Tai Ta. With each stamp on the ground, the earth would to shake. Jian Chen's eyes flashed in concentration. I'll attack it from the front. Tai Ta, you go around and attack it from behind. Charging forward, he jumped into the air straight towards the flaming cloud beast's head. The moment Jian Chen had moved, Tai Ta started to move as well, and circled around the beast to come towards its behind. Standing on top of its head, Jian Chen let out a yell as his saint force gathered within his iron rod, before fiercely stabbing it into the head of the beast. Ding! As if made of steel, the head of the flaming cloud beast deflected Jian Chen's iron rod. It had only left a shallow line on its head, unable to penetrate through its defense. Jian Chen's face changed into a grimace. Although he knew the flaming cloud beast had a strong defense, he hadn't thought that it would be so strong that his iron rod could do no damage to it. He had used all of his strength in that attack, and it had unexpectedly done virtually nothing. Aye! With a roar, Tai Ta jumped forward and used his enormous strength to slash at the butt of the flaming cloud beast with his battle-axe. However, he didn't do any better than Jian Chen. Although his battle-axe had cut through the skin of the magical beast, it had done no damage at all. Their attacks had evidently angered the flaming cloud beast, because it roared in response. Whipping its head back and forth, it threw off Jian Chen, who had been standing on its head. As Jian Chen flew through the air, he quickly readjusted himself. Using both of his feet to jump off a tree trunk, he flipped himself upright onto a nearby tree branch. After throwing off Jian Chen, the flaming cloud beast turned around and tried to bite into Tai Ta. Tai Ta immediately leapt aside to avoid its mouth, and simultaneously swung his battle-axe into one of the giant tusks. Ding! The battle-axe smashed against the tusk, breaking it off near the root. However, after the tusk was broken off, Tai Ta's battle-axe chipped off in several places as well. Ho! The flaming cloud beast roared in anger as it stampeded towards Tai Ta once more. Tai Ta's eyes flashed dangerously as it watched the flaming cloud beast charge towards him. Without bothering to dodge, Tai Ta dropped his battle-axe onto the ground and used both of his hands to grab onto the remaining tusk and the root of the broken one, before pushing back at the monster, resulting in a deadlock. At that moment, it was as if Tai Ta had turned into a fierce beast. Grunting out loud, his hands pushed against the flaming cloud beast's tusks, as if trying to compare his strength to it. Despite Tai Ta's heavenly strength, he was still a delicate tiny figure compared to the heavy and gigantic flaming cloud beast. So even though his own strength wasn't lacking, he found himself being pushed backwards a large distance, his feet leaving behind 2 deep marks in the ground. Ah! Tai Ta's eyes revealed a crazy look within them as he roared. The veins within his arms bulged as both of his arms swelled up in an instant, as he began to exert more force. Pa! Another crisp sound was heard as the remaining tusk was snapped off by Tai Ta, causing the flaming cloud beast to release a blood-curdling roar of pain. Despite having used a good amount of his strength, Tai Ta was not yet satisfied, as he grabbed onto the freshly broken-off tusk and used it to pierce it into the head of the flaming cloud beast. The tooth of the flaming cloud beast was extraordinarily sharp, and was far stronger than Jian Chen's weapon. But despite its sharpness, it had only penetrated into the head by a tiny amount, causing a small amount of blood to spurt outwards. Seeing Tai Ta use its own tusk to stab it, the flaming cloud beast's eyes grew extremely red as it opened its mouth wide. With a loud roar, it unleashed a trail of fire that moved around, almost like a serpent emerging from its gaping jaws, with the intention of roasting Tai Ta alive. Instantly, the surrounding temperature had started to increase exponentially. Sensing the astonishing heat radiate from the stream of fire, Tai Ta's expression immediately changed, as he desperately threw himself away from the attack. But despite his efforts, he had not been able to dodge the attack of the fire serpent, and so his entire body caught on fire. Seeing Tai Ta's body catch on fire, Jian Chen turned pale with fright. Immediately snapping off a thick tree branch, he jumped off against a tree trunk and sped towards the Tai Ta like a speeding bullet. Ho! The flaming cloud beast roared once more as it stamped towards the still-burning Tai Ta. Opening its jaws wide, it tried to swallow him, not caring if he was on fire or not. Just as the flaming cloud beast was about to consume Tai Ta, Jian Chen had finally reached Tai Ta. Using both of his arms, Jian Chen waved the tree branch in his hand to drag Tai Ta a good 10 meters away from the jaws of the magical beast. Jian Chen quickly dislodged Tai Ta from the branch, and without caring for the fire's heat, he quickly extended his arms and tore away at the wolf leather Tai Ta was wearing. Because the fire had caught onto the fur of the wolf leather, the moment it was removed from him, Tai Ta was no longer on fire. Tai Ta's tattered academy uniform was exposed underneath. Tai Ta didn't bother to get up from the floor, but instead started to roll on the ground while complaining, "Hot, hot. I'm dying from the heat, it burns." Seeing him complain like that, Jian Chen deduced that Tai Ta had not suffered any major harm. However, all of his hair had been burnt off, leaving him bald. Not a single hair remained. Even his eyebrows and eyelashes had been burnt away. Chapter 42. Roadside Robbery/P. Tai Ta, are you all right? Jian Chen asked in concern. Tai Ta shook his head. He let out a long breath and spoke in a muffled voice, "I'm fine, but the heat really got me. It was difficult to endure." "As long as you're fine." Jian Chen sighed in relief. When he saw that Tai Ta was engulfed in flames, Jian Chen had honestly felt quite concerned for Tai Ta's well-being. Suddenly, Jian Chen's eyes hardened as he turned back to look at the lush tree. His eyes gleamed as his mouth also rose up to show a hint of a smile. Hum, hum, hum. The ground began to shake again as the flaming cloud beast stamped towards Jian Chen. With each step it took, the earth trembled. The flaming cloud beast kept breathing fire out of its mouth, almost as if it was excited. Tai Ta's face hardened as he stared at the approaching flaming cloud beast. "Chongyang Xiangtian, this guy's skin is fairly tough. How do we go about killing him?" Jian Chen also looked at the beast with a grave face. The flaming cloud beast's body is entirely covered by a strong layer of skin. Unless we reach the level of saints, our weapons will barely be able to slice apart its pelt. At the moment, our only chance is to attack through the flaming cloud beast's eyes to stab its brain. As Jian Chen trailed off, the flaming cloud beast roared, and opened up its jaws to release another serpent fire. Jian Chen and Tai Ta both dove towards the side to dodge it. Jian Chen tightly clenched the iron rod, as he cried out, "Tai Ta, distract it for me." "Don't worry, leave it to me." Tai Ta picked up a nearby rock and threw it at the flaming cloud beast, and ran towards the opposite direction. The rock twirled in midair before hitting the flaming cloud beast precisely on the spot where Tai Ta had broke off the tusk. Since the spot was still tender for the flaming cloud beast, its eyes turned red with bloodlust as it began to breath fire at Tai Ta once more. Jian Chen watched as Tai Ta distracted the flaming cloud beast. He gripped the iron rod so hard that it had begun to deform. Quickly running forward, he dashed towards the head of the flaming cloud beast. Jian Chen's speed was fairly fast. As he dashed across the ground, the grass around him swayed from the rapid air currents, which made him seem like he was flying. In a short moment, Jian Chen had reached the head of the flaming cloud beast. Not even caring for the intense heat from the streams of fire the beast was spitting out, he jumped into the air once more to land on the head of the beast. With the iron rod in his right hand, he quickly stabbed it into the eyes of the flaming cloud beast. Although Jian Chen had moved quickly, the flaming cloud beast wasn't slow to react either. Before the iron rod could pierce the eye, the beast suddenly shut its eyes. Jian Chen's eyes flashed for just a brief second as he saw the flaming cloud beast close its eyes. Focusing, Jian Chen condensed his soul and willed it to enter his iron rod. As it covered the sharp point of the iron rod, he tried to ram it into the eyelid of the flaming cloud beast. The iron rod then pierced through the eyelid with no difficulty or resistance. Immediately, blood came pouring out of the eye of the flaming cloud beast. "Ho!" The flaming cloud beast suddenly let loose a desolate cry that shook the heavens themselves, as it whirled and struck out randomly in all directions. Jian Chen exerted more pressure on his right arm, pushing the iron rod in even deeper in attempt to strike at the brain from the eyes. The flaming cloud beast's screams became more desolate as it started to sway back and forth. It attempted to remove the iron rod from its eye, but the rod had already sunken far too deep, making it difficult to remove. As it shook its head to remove Jian Chen, the pain grew more intense. After 2 attempts at shaking its head, the pain was so fierce for the flaming cloud beast that it didn't dare to move at all anymore. Endlessly wailing in pain, the flaming cloud beast dropped to the ground, where it began its final struggle to fight. Although the wound wasn't fatal, the damage done to its cranial nerves was excruciatingly hard to bear. Seeing the flaming cloud beast fall to the ground, Jian Chen flashed in glee as he yelled, "Tai Ta, quickly drive the iron rod deeper in." Given Tai Ta's heavenly strength, this task couldn't be more appropriate for anyone else. "All right, I'm on my way," Tai Ta cried out happily as he ran over, having now realized that victory was on hand. Tai Ta approached the flaming cloud beast quickly and grabbed the iron rod before pushing it 1 meter deeper into the eye of the flaming cloud beast with his right hand. Only a small portion of the rod was left sticking out. "Ho!" The loudest cry yet came out of the beast, causing Tai Ta and Jian Chen's ears to momentarily go deaf. With that, the flaming cloud beast expended the last of its energy and slumped onto the ground. It stopped twitching, and its other eye gradually closed. Seeing that the beast had finally died, Jian Chen and Tai Ta could not help but exhale in relief. The Class 2 magical beast flaming cloud beast wasn't that amazing, but its defenses were extraordinarily high. Thus, killing it was an extremely difficult task. It finally died. This magical beast was too troublesome. It even breathed out fire and burnt away all my hair. Tai Ta touched his bald head with a depressed expression. Jian Chen could only laugh as he watched Tai Ta gloom over his hair and clothes. "You should at the very least put something on," he said as he took out another wolf pelt from his space belt. The wolf pelts were something he and Tai Ta had prepared. There were many sets stored within their belts just in case they needed a new change of clothes. Because they were in a forest where battle was a common occurrence, a change of clothes could not be in high enough demand. Tai Ta took it without another word, and in a flash, he had transformed the pelt into wearable clothing. Afterwards, Jian Chen and Tai Ta extracted the monster core and continued on their way. After Jian Chen and Tai Ta disappeared from view, a red-clad figure dropped down from the trees. The figure was a tall woman, around 30 years old, clad in fiery red clothing. Her appearance was not extremely beautiful, yet she gave off a gentle, calm air. The woman stared at the carcass of the flaming cloud beast with astonishment written clearly on her face. Letting out a deep breath, the woman muttered to herself, "Tai Ta and Chongyang Xiangtian, you two truly have well-deserved reputations. To think your strengths are this amazing. You two aren't even saints yet and you managed to use regular iron weapons to kill a Class 2 magical beast known for its defenses. I am truly awestruck. I must report this to the headmaster." After saying that, the woman immediately vanished into thin air. As soon as the woman disappeared, another 5 youths came into the clearing. Each of the 5's faces were covered by darkness, so their appearances couldn't be easily seen. However, their shabby academy uniforms could be seen as they held their weapons up. 2 held great swords while another held up a large axe. The last youth with a tall and sturdy body held his sledgehammer up as he followed the group. Judging from the sound, the cry came from this area. One of the great sword-wielding youths said to the rest. The axe-carrying student nodded his head. "Not bad. If the magical beast didn't run too far away, then it should still be in the vicinity." He trailed off as his eyes widened at the sight in front of him. "You guys, look!" "What is that?" he pointed. Hearing their friend, everyone's eyes drifted forward as they saw a mountain-like fiery red body lying on the ground that seemed to resemble a magical beast. "Let's go look." In a flash, all 5 of them approached the body of the magical beast. However, after they recognized the magical beast, their faces all grew serious. The most experienced one amongst them got close to the body and touched the bloody fur with one hand before saying, "This is a flaming cloud beast. Its defenses are very high, but its attacks aren't all that strong. The blood hasn't dried yet and is still warm, so it must have just died. It would appear that the howl we heard earlier was from this." The sword youth looked around himself before looking at the direction of Jian Chen's footprints. "Come, let's go follow those footsteps and see who exactly killed this flaming cloud beast. If their strength is good enough, we can add them to our group so we can easily hunt more beasts. But if they're weaker than us..." A small smile started to creep up on his face. Hearing this, the other 4 youths all thought of the same thing, their faces revealing evil smiles. Soon after, the 5 of them immediately chased after Tai Ta and Jian Chen. At the moment, Jian Chen and Tai Ta were cautiously walking within the forest. In order to protect themselves from magical beasts as well as a few of the swamps on the ground, the 2 of them were not advancing very quickly. At that moment, Jian Chen's ears detected something. Holding his hand up to stop Tai Ta, he said, "Be careful, there's some people coming from behind us." Tai Ta immediately stopped moving and turned around in curiosity. In the blink of an eye, the people who had been following Jian Chen came into view. There was a total of 5 people, but Jian Chen couldn't see their faces since it was covered by the shade. But he could tell that they were strong from the amount of saint force they were emitting from their weapons. When the 5 saw Jian Chen and Tai Ta, they let loose happy smiles to each other, as if they had mutually agreed on something. Increasing their speeds, the 5 of them quickly reached and surrounded Jian Chen and Tai Ta. Seeing this development, both Tai Ta and Jian Chen felt a bad premonition within themselves. "Dear students, might I ask what you're doing?" Jian Chen asked. One of the youths brandished his sword with an evil smile. "You're asking us what we are doing? Hand over your space belts obediently. We definitely don't want to embarrass you, but if you don't comply..." "Ha ha ha," the sledgehammer-wielding student sneered at them. Tai Ta's face grew angry as he heard the demand. "You want us to hand over the space belts? Humph. Don't even think about it." Tai Ta understood what was going on now. This was a roadside robbery. Jian Chen patted the space belt on him gently with a smile. "The space belts with all our monster cores are inside. If you have the skill, come and get it then." Although they knew that all 5 of them were saints, neither Jian Chen nor Tai Ta felt a hint of fear. "Humph, since it came down to this, then don't blame us for this. Everyone, attack together." Immediately the 5 of them rushed forward to attack the 2. But their attacks were not aimed at fatal areas. The 5 clearly understood that they were still all students. Stealing was one thing, and so was fighting, but they were not allowed to fatally threaten the opposing party's lives. Chapter 43. Counter-Steal. Jian Chen and Tai Ta immediately dove to the side. After 2 days of relentlessly fighting magical beasts, even the thick-skulled Tai Ta had started to pick up battle experience. This paid off. As Tai Ta dodged the incoming attack, he instinctively swung his battle-axe at the leg of the assailant in a swift counterattack. However, the group in front of them was proving hard to deal with. Just as the battle-axe was about to hit one of them in the thigh, a sword flew out and hit the battle-axe with a colliding sound. Dang! Metal met metal, as Tai Ta's battle-axe was obstructed. Due to Tai Ta's terrifying strength, the battle-axe continued to slide down the blade of the sword before stopping at the hilt. Immediately, the youth holding the sword suddenly felt his entire arm go numb, as the battle-axe smashed itself against his arm, causing his whole hand to shake. The youth was astonished and cried out to his friends, "Everyone be careful, this guy's strength is abnormally strong. It's best if you don't get into arm's reach of him." Hearing the warning, the other 2 students fighting Tai Ta immediately became more cautious, and tried to avoid his giant battle-axe. On the side, Jian Chen was fighting intensely with the other youth holding a sword. Although Jian Chen's weapon was only a corroded iron rod, his fighting capabilities weren't any lower than Tai Ta's. He wasn't any weaker either, since he could easily use his agility to move around his opponent's moves. Seeing an opening, Jian Chen quickly stabbed his iron rod into the opponent's thigh with a lightning-fast speed. Since this was another student at the academy, he didn't dare to aim to kill, but instead aimed to injure. Jian Chen's speed was so fast that the student didn't have time to react, and could only watch in shock as the iron rod stabbed into his thigh. "Ah!" The youth cried out in pain as his face drained of color, and sweat dripped down his forehead. Hearing his companion cry out, the other sword wielder's face changed. Unable to fight Jian Chen personally, he cried out to his friend, "Harry, are you okay?" Although that youth wasn't attacking Jian Chen anymore, Jian Chen wasn't going to let him off that easily. As Jian Chen moved towards him, the saint force condensed into Jian Chen's fist as he suddenly punched the youth in the chest. Still moving at fast speeds, he refused to listen to the youth's complaints, or even wait for the youth to react. Jian Chen's palm struck out silently like a viper, and hit the other squarely on the chest. Pang! The youth was sent flying through the air from Jian Chen's fist, as blood came spurting out of his mouth. After dispatching the 2, he immediately went to go assist Tai Ta. At the moment, Tai Ta was embroiled in a tough battle, and had already taken damage from the 3 people. The wolf pelt he was wearing had already been slashed apart and ruined by the blood that was leaking from his wounds. If it weren't for his extremely durable body and godly strength, the others would not have been afraid to fight against him and knock him to the ground. With the appearance of Jian Chen, Tai Ta's pressure was alleviated by quite a bit. Jian Chen's strength in battle was extremely strong, and even normal saints wouldn't be able to fight him on equal footing. After a few seconds of close combat fighting against Jian Chen, The three that had surrounded Tai Ta had already started to lose. Each of them were sporting new injuries, and soon after, all 5 of them were writhing on the floor in pain, no longer having the energy to move. Jian Chen looked at the many wounds on Tai Ta, and asked with some concern, "Tai Ta, are you okay?" Tai Ta nodded his head and said, "I'm fine, my body's pretty tough." He pointed to the group of 5 people writhing on the ground. "What should we do with them?" Thinking about it, Jian Chen suddenly grew a strange smile on his face. "Tai Ta, go gather their space belts and take all of their monster cores before giving the belts back." Hearing Jian Chen, the 5 people on the ground went rigid as their faces paled. A few of them were growing red with indignation. The cores in their space belts were earned over the span of 2 days of constant struggles for their lives. Right now there was only half a day left until the 3rd day passed. If they were to lose all of their monster cores now, then they would definitely fail the mission. Tai Ta laughed. Without hesitation, he immediately followed Jian Chen's orders, and grabbed all 5 of the space belts from them. Jian Chen stared them down with the bloody iron rod in his hand, like a tiger watching his prey to prevent them from making any sudden movements. The 5 students originally had planned to fight back, but when they saw Jian Chen grip the bloody iron rod, they immediately gave up all thoughts about resisting, and obediently let Tai Ta take their space belts. After gathering all of the space belts, Tai Ta brought them back to Jian Chen and began to count the monster cores one by one. In total, they had only 12 monster cores, all of which were Class 2 monster cores. Jian Chen laughed as he grabbed 6 of the monster cores and put them in their own space belts before saying, "Tai Ta, let's split these in half, you get 6, I get 6. "All right," Tai Ta said as he placed his share into his own space belt. But when the 5 heard Tai Ta's name, all 5 of them went still, as their faces became unsightly to look at. When it came to his name, everyone in Kargath Academy had heard of him since he was the headmaster's apprentice. Although he wasn't a saint, when it came to the entire school, no one dared to mess with him. By this point, the 5 students started to regret their actions so much that their intestines became green. If they had known earlier that one of them was Tai Ta, then they wouldn't have tried to steal from the headmaster's apprentice no matter what. But now, not only were they robbed of what they were trying to steal, but they couldn't even get revenge now that they knew who he was. Their sufferings couldn't be summed up in words. Basically, they regret their actions so much they want to die. After storing all of the Class 2 monster cores, Tai Ta was smiling even brighter. "Chongyang Xiang Tian, it's because you're so amazing and beat all 5 of them so quickly. Tai Ta, just can't compare to you at all." Jian Chen laughed and said, "All right, let's get back on the road now and hope we can kill a few more magical beasts for the sake of our cultivation." Soon after, Jian Chen and Tai Ta didn't see the paralyzed looks of the 5 students on the floor as they walked away. When the 2 disappeared into the forest, one of the youths started to curse out loud. "Fucking hell, what bad luck we have. To think we came across the apprentice of the headmaster and then failed the assignment. Not only that, but we had our monster cores stolen away from us without us being able to get revenge. Such wretched luck." The youth who had carried the sledgehammer earlier said in a hoarse voice, "That's not all of it. Don't forget that it wasn't just Tai Ta who attacked us. There was another." Everyone's eyes lit up. "You're talking about Chongyang Xiang Tian." The sledgehammer student nodded his head. "That's right. Tai Ta has the support of the headmaster, so we can't get revenge on him. But Chongyang Xiang Tian doesn't have that same support." "But Chongyang Xiang Tian's strength is so strong though. The 5 of us couldn't beat him while he was alone. How would we ever beat him?" Another person asked. "That's right, and the most important fact was that Chongyang Xiang Tian was far too fast. We couldn't even dodge any of his attacks." One of the sword wielders said. It was the very same person who had his thigh pierced by Jian Chen. Then the person with the axe opened his mouth suddenly. "You guys forget that Chongyang Xiang Tian already offended a lot of people at the academy like Lord Cheng and Master Luo, whose strength is higher than ours. If we can find an opportunity to join them, sooner or later we'll find a chance to strike at him." In the blink of an eye, the colors of the sky began to dim. The magical beasts in the 3rd region were far less abundant than the ones in the 2nd region. Half a day had passed, but Jian Chen and Tai Ta had only found a few magical beasts. Every time they encountered one, they experienced an arduous battle to kill it. Within that afternoon, the 2 of them had only gained another 7 Class 2 monster cores. Compared to their bounty in the 2nd region, this number was clearly insignificant. But when they thought about how the 5 students who attacked them earlier had only gained 12 Class 2 monster cores in 2 days despite being saints, their hearts felt a bit more relieved. It was a lot more restless in the third region than the second, since the monsters were a lot harder to kill. Also, since the number of monsters were less, more people were willing to rob others for their cores. After Jian Chen and Tai Ta had fought against the 5 students from before, they had another 3 encounters with robbers. At the very least each group had 4 people in it, and at the most a group had 7 of them. But in the end, they had overcome each challenge victorious, and took all of the monster cores from the other groups. But what had made Jian Chen depressed was that the group of 4 that attacked them earlier didn't have a single monster core, but the other 2 groups had a total of 33 Class 2 monster cores in the end. When night came, Jian Chen and Tai Ta sat down next to the fire as they roasted the meat of a magical beast. The 2 looked exhausted. Compared to the second region, the third region was far more tiring. At this point, Tai Ta's academy uniform was essentially gone. On his chest, his gains were showing. Only the most important part of his body was covered up by one of the extra wolf pelts, making him look like a savage. He was already covered with scars all over, and although they looked painful, they were only superficial wounds that didn't affect Tai Ta at all. This was a strong body that even Jian Chen looked at with jealousy. Jian Chen, on the other hand, was not faring much better. Although he still stuck with wearing his academy uniform, it had already been dyed red from blood, staining the clothes black after oxidizing. Suddenly, Jian Chen could hear the sounds of a distant battle. With his acute ears, he could hear the faintest of sounds. Jian Chen stood up from where he was sitting, and looked off to where he heard the sounds. Tai Ta, there's a fight going on over there. Chapter 44. Coincidental meeting with Big Brother Tai Ta didn't seem to care at all. I bet it's someone fighting against another magical beast. At first, Jian Chen thought so too, but the knowledge from his previous life had told him that these were the sounds of battle between people. In this environment, no matter what sound it was, Jian Chen was always on alert, especially since he had already been attacked by his fellow students multiple times earlier that day. Jian Chen had seen those older and more experienced students fall due to not always being on guard. Jian Chen didn't plan to end up like them. Straining his ears to hear the most minute of sounds, Jian Chen tried to catch the sounds he heard earlier. But as soon as he furrowed his eyebrows in thought, he heard the sound again. It wasn't the sound of a person fighting a magical beast, but of 2 people fighting each other. In addition, the sounds were getting closer. Jian Chen looked at Tai Ta and said, Tai Ta, that's not the sound of a person fighting against a magical beast, but of 2 people fighting each other. The sounds are getting louder and louder, so you should prepare yourself. We might end up fighting. Jian Chen didn't choose to change locations. With their current strength they could easily protect themselves. In addition, he wasn't afraid of anything. Tai Ta immediately became interested as he grabbed his battle axe and asked, How many people do you think are fighting? Changyang Xiang Tian, do you think we should take a look? Jian Chen held the iron rod over the fire. No need. Even without our interference, they'll be approaching us soon enough. Ah! Tai Ta sat back down after that with a look of serenity. Soon enough, the sounds of battle became louder and louder, to the point where even Tai Ta could hear it. A group of figures quickly came scurrying out from the bushes, and ran to where the bonfire was. Right behind them, a person wearing black flashed in, clearly chasing the other group. My 2 friends, the group behind wants to steal our monster core. Not only are they strong, but their numbers are greater than ours. I hope that we can combine forces and fight them off. Otherwise, the hard work we had painstakingly earned over the last 2 days will be taken by them. One person shouted from a distance. Although Jian Chen and Tai Ta were only 2 people, if they joined them then they would be able to fairly go against the opposite party. Hearing that voice, Jian Chen's eyebrows knitted together. He felt that this voice was very familiar to him, as if he had heard it before. However, he couldn't place a name on the voice. Clearly it hadn't left much of an impression. The 4 people that were running away were getting closer and closer to Jian Chen now. The person chasing them from behind suddenly sped forward and blocked off the 4 from moving forward anymore. Holding his giant sword up, he swung his sword at the ones who were still running. The one leading the team fought back with his own saint weapon to block against the sword. Dang! The 2 people had a huge difference in strength that could easily be seen, as the one who had blocked the attack was thrown backwards violently. With this distraction, the people chasing from behind had finally caught up and once more started to attack those who were trying to run away. There were 8 people that had come in pursuit, and all of them quite strong. The difference between their numbers only added to the pressure. Without reinforcements, the ones who were trying to run away would ultimately lose. Luo Jian, just wait there, I won't let you get away. One of the ones who were running away snarled. Hearing this, Jian Chen, who was standing not too far away, went rigid. The voice who spoke out was one he was familiar with. It was his older brother Chongyang Hu. Big brother! Jian Chen cried out in astonishment. Immediately his face became one of shock, and without hesitation, he rushed on over with his iron rod in hand. Seeing Jian Chen move, Tai Ta began follow Jian Chen with his battle-axe in hand. For the past 3 days, Tai Ta had started to follow all of Jian Chen's commands without even realizing it. Over the course of the 3 days, Jian Chen's strength had been fully revealed. With his experience of surviving in the forest and his strategy, Tai Ta had been humbled by Jian Chen's talents. Flying across the ground, Jian Chen ran across the grass towards where the fight was taking place. His hands blurred as the iron rod flew through the air and pierced into one of the people his brother was fighting. He was relieved to hear that one of the people coming towards him was his older brother, Chongyang Hu. Although everyone had noticed Jian Chen and Tai Ta, and were all cautiously guarded against the two, Jian Chen had moved far too fast and without warning. In their limited lines of sight due to the darkness, no one had noticed the iron rod in Jian Chen's hand. The pointed end of the iron rod stabbed into the Chongyang Hu's attacker, causing him to scream out in pain into the night sky as he whirled around. Without waiting for the guy to react further, Jian Chen immediately brought his leg to his chest and kicked him away into the air. At this moment, Tai Ta also charged over. He swung his axe around, hacking away at the enemies, causing them to be batted away. But the person Tai Ta was swinging at wasn't slow to react either. Watching the axe come down on them, his face didn't reveal the smallest amount of fear, and instead, he brought his sword up to block the axe. Dang! Once the sword met the battle-axe, Tai Ta and the other were brought to a deadlock with a loud clang. Their weapons shook. Tai Ta remained where he stood, while the other person was forcibly sent flying backwards. With Tai Ta's godly strength, unless one was a giant, then she would stand no chance against Tai Ta. But the person who was fighting against him was no giant, and so he had taken a huge loss. However, even with that development, Tai Ta's battle-axe chipped once more. Although the difference in strength was huge, if Tai Ta had not enveloped his battle-axe with his own saint force, then the battle-axe would have long since been destroyed. Tai Ta let loose a snarl as he brandished his battle-axe. The group of robbers then dispatched another 2 people to face off against Tai Ta. Dang! After his clear clang, another person who didn't understand how strong Tai Ta was collided against him one more time. Immediately, he was launched into the air by Tai Ta's battle-axe, which caused his battle-axe to chip even more. Although Tai Ta's battle-axe was strong, it was far from being on the same level as a saint weapon, because every saint weapon had a great amount of energy within it. With a saint weapon, one could release an attack far stronger than normal blows. However, these people Jian Chen were fighting against were far too weak, and some of them were still at the primary levels of a saint. While Tai Ta could go toe-to-toe with those primary-leveled saints, his battle-axe had been through far too many collisions. Be careful, his strength is extraordinarily high, and watch out for his battle-axe. The one who was blown away from him yelled as a warning. Hearing his companion's warning, the remaining youth became extremely cautious. He dodged the battle-axe, and grabbed onto Tai Ta's space belt. Jian Chen was moving around with the speed of lightning, as his iron rod flashed this way and that. With his body moving like a spirit's, he fought alongside with Chongyang Hu. Already dyed red with blood, the iron rod was concealed under the shade of the night, as if it was a viper. As he wandered about the area in the darkness, his iron rod shot out silently, in a silent manner that was difficult for his enemies to detect. Jian Chen was striking out with his iron rod so fast that even the person fighting Chongyang Hu were not able to react in time, as his thighs were speared through with the iron rod. The person's face grimaced in pain as he let out a painful scream, and clenched his hands in reflex. Chongyang Hu was not courteous enough to wait for him to simmer down, and immediately sliced at his opponent's left shoulder. Immediately, he cried out in pain again as his left arm was cut, the sword cutting the bone clean off, leaving his arm to be connected to his arm by a small amount of flesh. A torrent of blood came spurting out as he grabbed at it. A cyan-colored light illuminated the night as they all saw a giant sword appear and slash down towards Jian Chen. Wind attributed Saint Force. Seeing the cyan light envelop the sword, Jian Chen's own face hardened. He immediately used the profound steps and melted away into the air like a mirage. As soon as he had faded away, the science sword immediately slashed through at the spot where Jian Chen had just been standing. Jian Chen reappeared 3 meters away. Not too far away. The person who had slashed at him stood arrogantly at the spot. Wearing a Raggedy Academy uniform dyed red with blood, his face was covered by the night, so Jian Chen couldn't recognize him. Jian Chen's eyes focused on the group. He snorted and said in a low voice, "Luo Jian, I didn't think I would meet you here." The youth Jian Chen addressed was startled. He thought the voice was far too familiar, so he carefully stared at Jian Chen. Although it was nighttime, there was still a gleaming light in the sky that allowed him to see Jian Chen's face clearly. However, after 3 days of constant fighting in the forest, without any clear water, everyone's faces was jet black. It was impossible for people to see each other's appearances with ease. However, the nearby Chongyang who heard the voice of Jian Chen, and his face became one of shock. He couldn't believe his eyes or ears. Your fourth brother." Chongyang, who was astonished. When it came to Jian Chen's voice, he was all too familiar with it. Luo Jian suddenly came to a realization as he laughed. "No wonder I thought your voice was familiar. So it was Chongyang Xiang Tian after all. I didn't think you would break through to becoming a saint. I really am amazed at that." After saying that, his eyes flashed dangerously. Jian Chen turned around and faced Chongyang, who, "Big brother, we'll talk later. Right now, I'll remove the crisis in front of us. You go help the others, and leave Luo Jian to me." Chapter 45. Luo Jian's defeat. Alright then, you take care of yourself, fourth brother. Luo Jian's strength has already reached the middle-ranked saint level. Chongyang, who immediately went off to help his friends. Although seeing Jian Chen in the third region was unexpected, he knew that now wasn't the time to try to figure out how or why. Because Jian Chen and Tai Ta's sudden appearance, the originally disadvantaged Chongyang, who and his group were now on an even playing field. Moreover, because of Tai Ta's existence, the winds of battle were blowing in their favor. The playing field was now sloped towards them in a short amount of time. Looking at the Luo Jian's dark and swarthy face, Jian Chen laughed. "Luo Jian, it looks like your plan to steal our monster cores will end in failure. Your monster cores will be given to us instead." Luo Jian's face grew angry as his eyes flashed dangerously. "Chongyang Xiangtian, you don't have the power to take away my monster cores." Jian Chen looked at Luo Jian with some disdain before saying, "Then let's test it out. Let's see if I have the power to snatch away your monster cores or not." Jian Chen said nothing more after that, as his body started to sway before charging quickly at Luo Jian. His hand held the iron rod and struck like a viper towards Luo Jian's chest, using the darkness of the night as its cover. A flash of killing intent went through Luo Jian's eyes as he held his cyan-colored sword up. He brandished it in an imposing manner before slashing at Jian Chen. Since Luo Jian was not only a middle-ranked saint, but also had wind-attributed saint force, his attacks were even faster than before. So much that whenever he swung his blade an after image would appear. Seeing the sword come down towards his head, Jian Chen dodged to the side, and continued to thrust the iron rod towards Luo Jian's chest. Luo Jian's face changed as he realized the speed the iron rod was traveling at was extremely high. At that critical moment, his sword was too far out to bring it back to protect himself, but his reaction speed wasn't too slow either. Reabsorbing the wind saint force into his body, he forced his body to move backwards and bring back his sword. Luo Jian's speed became faster. The moment Jian Chen's iron touched Luo Jian's clothes, he had already escaped from Jian Chen's range of attack. As soon as he had escaped Jian Chen's range, he immediately started to gather the saint force into his hands again to slash at Jian Chen again with the sword. Luo Jian's attack was fairly simple, but to Jian Chen's eyes, it was a mess of an attack. Not a single amount of technique or finesse was shown. However, Jian Chen still didn't dare to belittle it too much. Jian Chen leapt into the air to dodge Luo Jian's sword. Immediately springing off from a tree trunk, he flew towards Luo Jian, his arms shaking, causing a faint mirror image to appear behind him. Jian Chen's arm was already traveling at high speeds, and the iron rod was traveling at the speed of lightning towards Luo Jian, so even the naked eye wouldn't be able to see it. Luo Jian's eyes widened in realization as the iron rod had already reached him. This time Luo Jian was unable to defend himself from Jian Chen's attack, nor was he able to dodge in time, resulting in the iron rod piercing deeply into his chest. Luo Zhen's face hardened as he stared at the impaled iron rod within him, a dumbfounded expression appearing on his face. Not only was there a tinge of disbelief on his face, but despair and fear as well. When the iron rod had pierced into him, he had been unable to mount any type of resistance against it. He had no defense, due to the iron rod being a lot faster in speed than he had been able to react to. Even if he was a wind attribute saint, the iron rod had still skewered straight through him, causing a fatal injury. What followed afterwards was beyond everyone's expectations. The moment Jian Chen's iron rod had pierced into Luo Zhen's chest, everyone had stopped moving. Then, a pure amount of saint force transferred from the iron rod into Luo Zhen's body. With the removal of the rod, the support disappeared, and Luo Zhen dropped onto the ground. When Jian Chen had sent his saint force-infused soul into Luo Zhen's body, it was as if his body had exploded. The energy rippled through Luo Zhen's body like an energy wave, wreaking havoc within his organs. PFF. Luo Zhen immediately spit out a mouthful of blood. The fierce pain he was feeling inside his body was strange and unknown to him. He let loose a blood-curdling scream as he rolled on the ground. Luo Zhen's scream was abnormally desolate and immediately caught the attention of all those still fighting. However, as their eyes looked at the rolling Luo Zhen, everyone except Tai Ta was stunned into silence. What they were watching caused them no small amount of shock, and many of them still couldn't believe their eyes. Even after finishing off Luo Zhen, Jian Chen didn't consider letting the group of robbers go. Holding his iron rod as he stood in the middle, he thought that it was lucky that he had met his older brother Chong Yonghu now. If he had met Chong Yonghu later, then Jian Chen was afraid that his brother would have lost all of his monster cores to Luo Zhen's group and been left with a heavy injury. With Jian Chen entering the battle, the opposition no longer had the upper hand. Although Jian Chen wasn't a saint like everyone else, he undoubtedly was the most powerful amongst everyone present. In his past life, Jian Chen was a traveling wanderer who had practiced the way of the sword, to the point where he had reached perfection with it. His moves were hard to detect since he moved so fast that it was inconceivable at some points. People who were relying on only their eyes wouldn't be able to see him. Since Jian Chen was only using an iron rod, his true strength could not be brought out. The opponents in front of him were mere students with little battle experience. With his extraordinary sword knowledge, he could quickly end the battle. Until the end of the fight, no one had realized that the weapon Jian Chen was using wasn't actually a saint weapon, but actually just a common iron rod. After the fight, all of the injured students that took part in the robbery sat down on the ground. Each one of them had a different type of wound on different spots, and they all looked at Jian Chen with terror. Looking at the 8 youths on the floor, although Chong Yonghu and his team of 4 were heavily injured, they couldn't help but reveal the joy of victory while looking at Jian Chen with stares of respectful admiration. Chong Yonghu, I didn't think you'd unexpectedly have such an amazingly strong 4th brother. His strength really leaves me astonished. That's right, Chong Yonghu. Although we heard about your 4th brother's strength a long time ago, I didn't think that he was this amazing until now. Even the middle-level Saint Luo Zhen was defeated by him. If it weren't for your 4th brother's help, I'm afraid that our group wouldn't have been able to protect the monster cores we worked so hard to get. The 3 youths and Chong Yonghu had a decent relationship with each other. Each one of them sighed in joy as they excitedly discussed the recent events. At this moment, Jian Chen arrived by Chong Yonghu's side and looked at his wounds. With some concern he asked, "Big brother, do you have any serious injuries?" Hearing this, Chong Yonghu shook his head absent-mindedly. Looking at Jian Chen with joy and surprise, he replied, "I'm fine, just fine. It's only a small wound. Don't forget, your older brother has the earth-attributed saint force, which improves my defenses by a lot." Chong Yonghu paused for a bit and then asked, "That's right, 4th brother, how did you come across the 3rd region? I remember that before we entered the forest, your strength was still before the saint level? Also, how did you become so amazing, for you to even defeat Luo Zhen?" Chong Yonghu asked curiously. Jian Chen laughed and said, "Big brother, this type of situation should be explained later over a nice and slow talk. Right now, we still have to take care of the problem in front of us." Jian Chen swept his gaze over at the several students who were on the ground. "Big brother, how do you think we should punish these guys?" Giving the question some thought, he said, "4th brother, this should be resolved by you. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid our group of 4 would have had all of our monster cores stolen." Jian Chen's face had a deep smile on it as he said, "In that case, there's no need to be merciful to them. At the very least, We should collect all of their monster cores from their space belts. Jian Chen's suggestion was quickly approved by everyone, and so under the poisonous and hateful glares of Luo Jian's group, they quickly grabbed all of the space belts and collected the monster cores inside. After checking their inventories, the 8 of them had a total of 130 monster cores. Seeing such a number, even Jian Chen was astonished by the amount. Chang Yang, who exclaimed in admiration, "I didn't think that they would have this many monster cores. It looks like they robbed many people before us. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to kill so many monsters in a span of 3 days with their strength." Jian Chen nodded his head in approval before saying, "Big brother, let's split the cores into 6 parts so that we each get an equal share." "That's no good." Jian Chen turned towards the new speaker, a youth from Changyang Hu's team. "Changyang Xiangtian, the only reason we were able to obtain these monster cores was because of you and your fellow comrade here. We didn't do anything at all, so you shouldn't split the cores with us and keep it among the 2 of you." The student's suggestion was quickly approved by the other 2 students. One of them immediately said, "Oz is right. Changyang Xiangtian, if it weren't for you and your friend, the strength of US4 wouldn't have been enough to win. I'm afraid we wouldn't have even been able to protect our own monster cores. But now that our monster cores are safe from their grasp, we are satisfied. The monster cores you got from Luo Jian and his friends are something we don't want." "Right, Changyang Xiangtian, you were able to get these monster cores with the combined strength of you and your friend. How could we be shameless enough to divide this up?" Jian Chen's eyes flickered with a bright glow as he looked at their faces, searching for any signs of falsity. However, he could only see sincere honesty, with absolutely no traces of dishonesty. His respect for the 3 grew tremendously, but he truly did admire his older brother the most. He didn't think his older brother would be able to find 3 friends with such good personalities like this. Although Chang Yang, who had the body and brain of a tiger, Jian Chen understood that his brother was not at all stupid. Jian Chen laughed and said, "Everyone had contributed to this situation. If it weren't for you guys stalling them, if they had somehow joined forces with Luo Jian to attack me, I'm afraid that I would have lost then. Let's go with this. Tai Ta and I will take half of the monster cores, and you guys will take the rest and divide it amongst yourselves. That should be fine, right?" Chapter 46. Rich Prophet. Haha. What 4th brother said is correct. This was something we all worked hard to do, so let's follow 4th brother's idea and split the monster cores. Half of it will be given to 4th brother and his other friend here. The other half will be equally split among the 4 of us. Chang Yang Hu laughed. He and Jian Chen were blood brothers. Even though they had different mothers, it did not affect the relationship between them. He would not be stingy with him. With Chang Yang Hu deciding for them, the other 3 students couldn't decline any more and took the monster cores excitedly. After splitting it up, each of the 4 had gotten at least a dozen, bringing them no small amount of excitement. With this amount, it was more than what they had gotten by themselves after last couple of days. After this event, no one had any plans to stay put anymore, and after changing their location, they began to start a new fire to roast some meat. The 6 people sat in a circle around the fire as Chang Yang Hu laughed. "4th brother, let me introduce you to everyone. These 3 are my best friends, Oz, Aoba, and Darian." He pointed at the 3. 4th brother, Oz and Aoba are identical twins. "I guarantee that when they wash the filth on their faces off, you won't be able to tell who is who." Jian Chen smiled and greeted the 3 one by one. After chatting for a while, they had started to get so familiar with each other that even Tai Ta's name was known by them. Suddenly, Chang Yang Hu's face went still as he asked, "4th brother, I remember that before you went into the forest, your strength wasn't at the saint level yet. So why is it you're in the 3rd region? And now being so strong, you were even able to defeat the middle-ranked Wind Saint Luo Jian. Could it be that in the 3 days you were in the forest you broke through?" Chang Yang Hu's 3 friends paid close attention to this question. Both Darian and the twins became interested after hearing Chang Yang Hu's question, and shifted their attention to Jian Chen. Jian Chen beating Luo Jian had a huge impact on those 3. Although they had long since heard the rumors that were circulating throughout the academy that he was strong, the rumors didn't exaggerate his strength to this extent. Jian Chen laughed and held his iron rod up towards Chang Yang Hu. "Big brother, look. If I were a saint, would I still be using a weapon like this?" Chang Yang Hu looked up and down the iron rod, but it looked the same. He had already recognized the blood-stained iron rod in Jian Chen's hands, and it was still a normal rusty broken iron rod. That's That's Chongyang, whose eyes went wide. He was put in a state of silent shock, as he would have never in a million years thought that Jian Chen would be able to defeat Luo Jian using only a rusty iron rod, and if this didn't happen before his very own eyes, he wouldn't have believed it even if he was beaten to death. At the same time, Darien and the twins looked at the iron rod in Chongyang-hu's hands. The three of them were in disbelief, and then looked at Jian Chen as if he was a monster. Seeing the incredulous looks on their faces, Jian Chen laughed and said, "With the combined powers of me and Tai Ta, there were no magical beasts that were a match for us in the second region, so we decided to move on to the third region." Hearing this, Chongyang-hu and the other three couldn't believe their ears. The second region was filled with Class 1 magical beasts. Although they were weaker and had low attack power, even the average saint would find surviving in the forest a difficult task, and Jian Chen was still obviously not a saint yet. To say the second region was no longer a challenge, even Chongyang-hu and his friends would curse Jian Chen's absurd strength. After a while, Chongyang-hu and his friends finally recovered their senses. Chongyang-hu continued to ask, "Fourth brother, you're not even a saint yet and you're already this amazing. When the day comes and you become a saint, I really can't guess how much stronger you'll become." Chongyang-hu shook his head in awe. "All right, fourth brother, when do you think you'll become a saint?" Muttering more to himself, "I'm currently at the peak of the 10th layer. After this forest exercise, I'll aim to become a saint." Chongyang-hu let out a breath of air in surprise and shock as he looked at Jian Chen. "Fourth brother, you're simply too amazing for words. Not even a few months ago, you were a new student at Kargath Academy who was only at the 8th layer. I didn't think that you would reach the peak of the 10th layer in such a short amount of time." Hearing this, Darien and the twins couldn't believe it, and their view of Jian Chen completely changed. The strength Jian Chen had shown was ridiculous, his cultivation speed was fast, and could border the line of the unimaginable. Jian Chen was definitely a genius among geniuses. At this moment, the three friends of Chongyang-hu quickly came to a decision that, in the future, they would have to treat him well and avoid offending him. Jian Chen laughed carefreely. "Big brother, I've noticed that within the third region, many people are resorting to stealing monster cores from others. How did this happen?" Chongyang-hu exhaled before saying, "I don't know who started this myself, but it said that during the second day, someone started to steal monster cores relying on the fact that he had an enormous amount of people behind him. After this news spread, everyone in the third region started to follow suit, forming groups to rob cores. After all, Class 2 magical beasts are rare in comparison to Class 1 magical beasts, and are even harder to kill. Killing one beast would only get you one, but stealing from another is much easier than hunting, and with good luck, one would get a lot of cores as well. So up until now, all the students started to steal from each other in the third region. Many people have had their hard-earned monster cores stolen away from them when they were alone or were smaller in numbers. The people who were injured decided to quit early, reducing the numbers in the area drastically. Why don't the teachers that are secretly hidden care about what was happening? Taita asked. As long as it isn't a life-threatening injury or a critical point between life or death, then the hidden teachers won't show up. After all, the reason why we are in the forest hunting magical beasts is so we can temper ourselves, not to mention that we are being tested on how we can unite when being robbed. Things like this happen often in the Tianyuan continent. They're only letting us experience this sooner rather than later," said the twins. "Ah!" Taita suddenly exclaimed in realization. Jian Chen let loose a strange smile as he looked at his older brother and his friends. "Since other people have the audacity to rob us of our monster cores, why can't we rob them first? Are you guys with me on this?" The group's eyes went bright as they heard Jian Chen. "Fine, we'll do it. Changyang Xiang Tian, we will follow you," Darien said as he stood up and stared at Jian Chen, the heroic spirit reflected in his voice. "Not bad, before our strength was lacking, and could only run away blindly. But now that Jian Chen is here, even if we meet a middle-rank saint, victory isn't impossible. Since this is the final night, let's have some fun with this." Aoba and Oz laughed. "All right, fourth brother, your big brother will listen to you," Chongyang-hu said happily. Taita didn't have an opinion, as he had decided to follow Jian Chen without question for a while now. After everyone had eaten their fill and discussed their plans, they decided to let the twins search the surroundings for targets, while the rest waited for their return. The twins soon came back and reported that they saw a group of 5 people nearby. Jian Chen immediately followed the twins towards where they had reported seeing them. When Jian Chen's group had reached the place, the 5 people were preparing themselves to rest and were caught unprepared by Jian Chen's sudden attack. Since the group was only at the primary saint level, they were quickly defeated by Jian Chen and his group. However, they didn't have that many monster cores, only having around 20 or so. After taking the monster cores, they didn't continue to harass them and immediately left the area. For the entire night, Jian Chen and the others didn't sleep at all. Instead, they looked around the forest for more targets. There weren't many people in the third region by now, and ever since he had started his search, he had only come across 3 different groups. But what he and the others found amusing was that halfway through the night, Jian Chen's group had came across another group who had the same idea they had, and so they had immediately started to fight. Both sides had 6 people each, and the other group even had 2 middle saints whose strength could be considered pretty strong. However, those 2 ended up being stuck against Jian Chen and Tai Ta. In the end, Jian Chen had come out victorious against his opponent, and gained 150 Class 2 monster cores as a reward. It would seem that many people had had their monster cores taken by this group. After the third battle, aside from Jian Chen, everyone else was exhausted and could not continue fighting anymore. With no other choice, they spent the rest of the night searching for a secret place to hide and sleep. Although Jian Chen and Tai Ta had wanted to continue, the other 4 weren't in any shape to, and needed the 2 of them to stay behind and protect them against any surprise attacks. Without saying, Jian Chen and the group had had an overwhelming harvest. Excluding the first group with their 20 monster cores, the other 2 groups had 70 cores and 150 cores respectively. So in total, they now had 260 cores. Seeing this many monster cores, Jian Chen was starting to suspect that this was already half of the total amount of Class 2 monster cores in the third region. The night passed peacefully, and the group started to travel towards the outside of the forest. With some herbal medicine, Chang Yonghu and the others' wounds were starting to heal slowly. Back when they had first entered the forest, the school administration had already prepared these medicines inside of their space belts. At the moment, Chang Yonghu and his friends were all wearing well-made wolf pelts that made them look as if they had no injuries at all. The wolf pelts were the ones that Jian Chen and Tai Ta had made from when they had slaughtered that pack of wolves. They had collected quite a large amount of them. Chapter 47. Returning to the academy, the group of 6 headed to the edge of the forest, now that they had completed their 3 days. If they could protect the monster cores until they reached the outside, then they would be able to finish the assignment perfectly. And since the academy would not take the cores, they would be able to use it for themselves. Traveling on the road, Jian Chen and the rest were very cautious. This was the crucial moment, since they could be ambushed at any given time. Jian Chen and Tai Ta were still full of life, but Chang Yonghu and the others were not in the best shape. If they were to be attacked by another strong group, then a fierce battle wouldn't be avoidable, which was what Jian Chen wanted to avoid. Jian Chen walked down the road with Tai Ta behind him while the rest followed in a straight line as they reached to the part of the forest where the white enchantments of the forest rippled outwards. With the end of the third day, the enchantment had suddenly transformed to help the students who were lost to find their way here. Jian Chen's soul was lashing out around him as he checked his surroundings. The third region was not as quiet as the second region. Not only did they have to protect themselves from magical beasts, but they also had to protect themselves from other students. Other students were waiting around for the perfect moment to strike. So because of that, the closer one got to the entrance, the more dangerous it became. After all, the enchantment was showing a hole in itself to help lead students out. So many of them were trying to leave the forest and made themselves an open target for those other students waiting to ambush them. A few hours passed. Jian Chen and Tai Ta were getting closer and closer to the third region's exit. The whole journey had been fairly peaceful, although at regular intervals, they'd encounter a magical beast carcass. Sometimes, there would even be 2 to 3 magical beast corpses lying in the same location. A few hours of rushing later, Jian Chen's group of people finally arrived outside of the third region's exit. They smoothly passed through and entered the second region. At this moment, everyone could not help but sigh in relief. They all understood that their monster cores were secured, because after leaving the third region, no matter whether or not others had gathered the required 2 monster cores, their task was complete. There was nobody here that would dare to steal their monster cores. Haha, I hadn't imagined that the journey would be so peaceful. This was really against my expectations. Chang Yonghu happily smiled, his tone also carrying a hint of excitement. Aoba also happily said, "That's right, and here I'd thought that we'd fall victim to some surprise attacks. I didn't think that the path would have been so calm. It really goes against all expectations." Darian reached his hand out to touch his space belt and smiled. I guess the people stealing monster cores in the third region had suffered from injuries, and didn't have the energy to keep stealing from others on the road. In addition, most of the people probably have the same mindset as us, only stressing self-defense. As long as we safely leave the third region, we'll be satisfied. None of us are interested in the idea of stealing monster cores anymore. Yeah, that's right. What you said makes sense. Tai Ta nodded in agreement. Jian Chen shook his head and said, the situation is not necessarily as you think it is. Actually, throughout the whole journey, there were still some people lying in wait along the way in hidden places ready to ambush us. You guys just didn't notice them. Those people who were hiding in the darkness perhaps noticed that we have a large number of people, or they didn't have the ability to discern our strength, so they couldn't determine if they could destroy us. That's why they didn't make any movements towards us. Otherwise, there's no way we could have safely left the third region. Hearing this, the people's expressions all changed. Chong Yang who let out a long breath and said, it's a good thing fourth brother made sure we put on perfect acts of being completely undamaged. Otherwise, if the people knew that the four of us were injured, then I'm afraid we wouldn't have been so fortunate. Hearing this, Aoba and the others nodded in agreement, and looked at Jian Chen with gazes filled with respect. All right, we should hurry up and leave. After we return back to the academy, you guys need to properly tend to your wounds. The group of 6 continued to walk towards the first region. As they got closer to the exit, the nearby academy gradually entered their lines of vision. Although there were definitely many people that had been unable to endure the task and gave up on it in the middle, at least 1,000 people had entered the forest together. Even if more than half had given up, there were still at least a few hundreds of people remaining. However, the mere hundreds of people spread out in the enormous forest rarely met each other, so it was rare to come across others that had decided to remain in the forest. Jian Chen's gaze swept across the people around him that were similarly heading out of the first region towards the academy. He saw that most of the males sported naked torsos, and were covered with wounds. However, without any exception, all the people were in sorry states. Their naked torsos were covered with dirt, and their faces could not be discerned with all the filth covering them. Only some of the females still wore the academy uniforms. However, every single one of the uniforms had become beyond dirty, and there were tears all over the clothing. Even a beggar's clothing was better than theirs. In addition, they used wide leaves to cover the parts that their clothes didn't, making them look like extremely sorry figures. Amongst all the people, there were also a few people who had serious leg injuries, rendering them unable to walk. They were being supported by their companions the whole way, and approached the outside of the forest, one step after another. Perhaps it was because there were so many people present here, but there were absolutely no magical beasts in the vicinity. It was even safer than before. Soon after, Jian Chen's group followed the direction the enchantment in the sky pointed to in order to exit the first region, and they finally exited the forest. Outside stood the vice headmaster, Chong Bai-en, wearing a white Chong Pao, his back straight. Behind him stood a few teachers with indifferent expressions. Further behind them was a large group of nearly 1,000 Kargath Academy students. They were split into 2 groups. The group on the right had many more times people than the other group. Among them, some people were wearing academy uniforms that were dirty, but had very few tears. On the whole, they seemed to be in excellent and undamaged conditions. The other group of people seemed to be in a more difficult situation. Their uniforms were all tattered, and sported quite a few bloodstains as well. Underneath the multiple rips on their clothes, it could clearly be seen that they sported many scars on their bodies. The people in the left group only had around 200 people. All of them were in sorry states. Majority of the people there were wearing clothes made of bark or beast skins, and there were quite a few people that had naked torsos. However, all the people that walked out of the forest were organized by a teacher to join the group on the left. Afterwards, Jian Chen's group sat on the grass quietly in wait. By this point, he had already understood that all the people in the left group were those that had stayed in the forest for the entire 3 days, and had just left the forest today. On the other hand, the people in the right group were all those that had escaped before the 3 days were up. According to the Academy's regulations, no matter whether or not they had fulfilled the requirement of obtaining 2 monster cores, they still had failed their tasks. As he swept his gaze in a circle, Jian Chen discovered that many people in the group he was with had melancholic expressions. There were others that looked at certain people with looks of deep hatred, looking like they would spit out flames from their eyes. At that moment, Jian Chen sensed something. He turned around to look behind him, and saw two people with dirty faces and wearing clothing made of beast skins supporting a student in similar attire. The two were currently glaring at Jian Chen with poisonous hatred, as if burning him into a crisp with their gazes alone. A strong killing intent. After Jian Chen closely examined the people, his mouth formed a hint of a sneer. He already recognized that the person was actually Luo Jian. Although Jian Chen knew that after what happened the previous night, he had definitely wronged Luo Jian, Jian Chen didn't pay much mind to it. In terms of strength, he wasn't below Luo Jian at all. Once he was able to condense a saint weapon and become a saint, Luo Jian would no longer pose any threat to him. In terms of family backgrounds, although Jian Chen wasn't completely sure of Chongyang clan's strength, they were in no means weak in any sort of aspect. Luo Jian was the son of the leader of a major powerful clan in Forbidden City, but in Jian Chen's opinion, there was no way the Luo clan would bother harassing him over such a trivial matter. After all, Luo Jian had only been injured by Jian Chen because of the training event that the academy had sent them on. In addition, the situation at that time had been because Luo Jian had first attacked his older brother's group. Afterwards, once all the people had walked out of the forest, Jian Chen's group had already increased to 300 to 400 people. At this moment, the vice headmaster Chong Bai-en walked up to the front of the crowd. He looked around at the group of figures that had obviously suffered through difficult situations. He smiled and loudly said, "Very good. As expected, none of you have disappointed me. I hadn't imagined that this event to hunt magical beasts and stay in the forest for 3 days would have more people remaining this time compared to all the previous times this event has been held. Now, I want everyone to maintain their current formations and begin walking back towards the academy." Afterwards, the entire two groups maintained their exact formations and quickly advanced towards the academy. In the middle of the journey, when they encountered a small river, everyone stopped to wash their faces clean, and then continued forward. Very soon, the group of students began to approach the academy, and in the distance, they noticed that a tall platform had been erected in the center of the sports field. The group of people stopped in front of the platform, and the vice headmaster Chong Bai-en, as well as a few teachers, walked up to it. The vice headmaster sat in the chairperson's place with a straightforward and imposing manner, and calmly said, "The magical beast hunting competition occurring once every 3 years has now officially ended. According to the Academy's regulations, after the task has been completed, we will now hand out awards. I would like to now invite all the people who had stayed in the forest for the entire 3 days and have gathered 2 monster cores to simultaneously step forwards." As soon as the vice headmaster finished speaking, 100 or so people immediately walked out of the crowd. I will now first count the Class 1 monster cores. Students who have hunted Class 1 magical beasts, please come up to the platform for the number of monster cores in your possession to be counted. The vice headmaster continued. Following this, all the students that had killed Class 1 magical beasts, including Jian Chen and Tai Ta, all walked up to the platform. There stood a teacher specifically assigned to count and record the number of monster cores that the students had earned. Chapter 48. Mu Tian. Among the 100 or so people, the majority of them were below the saint level, and had performed the event in the second region. When the students that had Class 1 monster cores walked up, only a bit over 30 people remained. This made the students who did not know much about the third region's conditions puzzled. Although the third region had Class 2 magical beasts, they all had low attack powers. To a saint that could condense a saint weapon, although it may not be possible for him or her to fight against the magical beast alone, as long as a few people work together, hunting magical beasts within the third region shouldn't be very difficult to do. It should definitely be easier than a student that had not yet reached saint level killing a Class 1 magical beast. After all, the saint weapons that saints had were extremely powerful, and far surpassed those other ordinary weapons. Logically, the chances of students completing their task in the third region should definitely be much higher than those in the second region. However, nobody had imagined that the event would end up with such results. In the third region, only a pathetic 30 or so students had completed their task. This was much less than the people who had finished in the second region. When the first student arrived in front of the teacher inspecting the monster cores, he directly reached into his space belt and lightly placed all of his monster cores on the table. This student only took out 3 monster cores total. Casually gazing at the 3 Class 1 monster cores, the approximately 50-year-old teacher in charge of inspecting the monster cores nodded and said, "Not bad. You qualify as passing. What's your name?" "Teacher, my name is Chung Yun Feng. The youth that was being inspected excitedly said. The two words, "not bad," had already confirmed the fact that the teacher was praising him. Being complimented by the teacher was the greatest honor to him. The teacher picked up his pen and recorded the information on a piece of paper, then said, "Go return your space belt to the academy. Take your monster cores. Also, this is a badge that represents your glory. You must take good care of it." The teacher pulled out a badge from underneath the table and handed it to the student. The student happily agreed. He carefully and tenderly took the badge, and then he walked off the platform in extremely high spirits. Next. Afterwards, students walked up in succession and handed their monster cores to the teacher for appraisal, and at the same time, were recorded. The process was quite fast, and in the blink of an eye, dozens of people had already passed. The fewest number of monster cores among them so far had been 2, and the greatest number had taken out 8, which had made the appraising elder shocked for a moment. At this moment, a handsome youth with an uncommon air walked up to get his monster cores inspected. The youth had a small scar on his forehead, and it was most likely a recent wound from the forest, since the scar still had a hint of blood on it. The youth calmly walked up to the elder, and quietly took off his space belt. He then began to take out monster cores, and placed them on the table one by one. As he was removing them, the table was soon filled with 6 Class 1 monster cores, yet he showed no signs of stopping. He continued to leisurely pull out monster core after monster core from his space belt. His movements were not at all rushed, and the expression on his face was indifferent, giving off the impression that he was a very steadfast person. When the youth first took out 6 monster cores, the inspecting teacher finally returned to his senses. A smile slowly formed on his face, and he lightly nodded while looking at the youth with an expression of admiration. Soon, the youth had already pulled out 10 monster cores. At this moment, the expression of the elder inspecting the monster cores finally changed. His gaze towards the youth was no longer one of admiration, but one of shock. For a person that had not yet reached Saint level to have managed to kill and retrieve monster cores from 10 Class 1 magical beasts was definitely not an easy task. In addition, the youth still showed no signs of stopping, signifying to everyone present that he still had not finished removing all of the monster cores from his space belt. The students lined up being this youth had already been shocked speechless at the sight of him pulling out so many monster cores. They thought back to how much energy they had consumed in the forest just to retrieve 2 to 3 monster cores. To them, this had already been quite an amazing achievement. Many of them had even felt quite proud of this. Yet the youth in front of them had pulled out many times more monster cores than they had received within the last 3 days in a single breath. How could they not be shocked? Having fought against the Class 1 magical beasts quite a few times, they had been left with a deep realization that without reaching Saint level, using an iron weapon to kill Class 1 magical beasts with such thick skin was extremely difficult. The youth did not pay any mind to the onlookers' expressions, as if he didn't see them. His movements had still not stopped, and he continued to pull out monster cores from his space belt one after another without a pause. Soon, there were already 15 monster cores piled onto the table, yet the youth still didn't show the slightest trace of stopping. He was still equally unhurried as before, and he very calmly continued to take out more monster cores from his space belt. At this moment, all the teachers on the platform were gazing at the youth in shock and disbelief. For a person not yet a saint to have killed more than 10 magical beasts within 3 days would perhaps be possible if he worked together with 5 to 6 people, but to have hunted so many magical beasts in 3 days alone was really something the teachers felt was impossible, unless those magical beasts were all seriously wounded. Sitting on top of the platform, the vice headmaster Chong Bai-en smiled and said, "His name seems to be Mu Tian. He only entered the academy last year. After only a single year, he went from the 8th Saint Force layer to the peak of the 10th layer. This speed is quite good. It's said that he even tried to attack a saint. Although he ultimately failed, it has to be admitted that the Mu clan really did send a good young successor this time." The vice headmaster Chong Bai-en paused for a bit, then shifted his gaze towards the lined-up Chongyang Xiang Tian and Tai Ta and muttered, "I really anticipate Chongyang Xiang Tian's and Tai Ta's harvests." It said that the two of them had actually ran to the 3rd region to hunt Class 2 magical beasts on the last day. Their powers are clearly not at the saint level yet. Heavens, to have relied on iron weapons to hunt Class 2 magical beasts, that is really too unfathomable. If I hadn't personally witnessed the two of them kill a completely undamaged Class 2 magical beast, I would not dare to believe that such a situation was true. It seems that not only did the headmaster accept a good apprentice, Lore City's Chongyang clan, which has been silent for so long, will soon return to their former glory because of Chongyang Xiang Tian in the near future. Only after the youth had taken out 23 Class 1 monster cores did he finally stop. He calmly looked at the inspecting elder taking notes, and said, "Teacher, these are the monster cores I retrieved." The elder in charge of the inspection swept a glance at the 23 monster cores and let out a long breath. He looked at the youth with bright eyes full of emotions and asked, "What's your name?" "Mu Tian." The youth replied in an indifferent tone. The elder's gaze gradually became more serious as he continued to ask, "Mu Tian, did you gain these monster cores by yourself, or did you work together with others for them?" Mu Tian's expression did not change, as he had long since expected this would happen. "Teacher, these monster cores were gained by my hard work alone." Hearing this, the elder's expression immediately changed. He looked intensely at Mu Tian with an expression beyond admiration, then smiled and nodded. "Good. Good. Good. Mu Tian, right? Very good. Your results are extremely outstanding. I hope that you continue to work hard in the future." The elder did not ask how Mu Tian had gained the 23 monster cores. That was not important at all. The important part was that he knew that these monster cores had been gained through Mu Tian's hard work alone. After all, in the Tian Yuan continent, strength represented everything. As long as one could achieve the final victory, no matter what kind of dishonest methods were used, nobody would say anything about it. Hearing the elder's words of praise, Mu Tian could not help but smile. At that moment, the elder took about a sky blue belt and badge. He handed them over to Mu Tian and said, "This is a space belt you had previously given us, and this is your badge. Take proper care of them." Mu Tian calmly accepted the space belt and the badge of glory, and reinserted the 23 monster cores into his space belt, before walking off the platform. From beginning to end, Mu Tian had not shown a single trace of arrogance or pride. He always had the same, indifferent expression. Jian Chen's gaze followed Mu Tian until he walked off the platform. In his heart, he had already committed Mu Tian's name to memory. Based on his intuition, he felt that Mu Tian was probably quite a complex person, and hadn't used his full potential yet either. In the future, he would definitely accomplish much more. It was simply still unknown which of the two paths he would choose to advance on. Because Mu Tian had taken out over 20 monster cores, the following students didn't induce any type of reactions when they removed their monster cores. Majority of them had only the minimum 2 monster cores. The number of people that had more than 2 was very few. Aside from Mu Tian's 23 monster cores, the highest harvest had been the previous 8 monster cores. The inspection went by quickly, and it was soon Jian Chen's turn. At this moment, the gazes of the vice headmaster sitting in the chairperson's seat, as well as a few other teachers, immediately lit up. Their eyes closely followed Jian Chen, showing expressions of extreme concentration. The vice headmaster Chong Bai-en, who had previously been reclining in his seat, could not help but straighten his back, as he gazed at Jian Chen, full of expectations. Although he knew that Jian Chen had killed quite a few magical beasts in the forest, he didn't know the exact numerical value of this quite a few. Jian Chen calmly walked up to the elder in charge of inspecting the monster cores and lowered his head to look at the 2-meter-long table. A troubled expression showed on his face, and after some hesitation, he said, "Teacher, can you please change to a larger table?" "Ha!" Hearing Jian Chen's words, the elderly man who was closely inspecting paused, and asked in confusion, "What did you just say?" Seeing that the table was originally not very large, and that there were already some items of little value on top of it, Jian Chen could only show a helpless expression. This table was really too small. There was absolutely no way he could fit all of his monster cores that pretty much completely filled his space belt. "Yes, teacher. Can I please ask you to change this table to a slightly larger one? This table is too small." Jian Chen continued. Chapter 49. The shock. Hearing Jian Chen's words, all the students lined up behind him, aside from Tai Ta, showed expressions of shock. They all gave extremely strange looks at Jian Chen, and quite a few suspected that they had heard him wrong. In their opinion, if you needed to hand over your monster cores, then just hand them over. Why would you bother caring about how large the table being used was? Wasn't this simply asking for trouble? Who is that person? He's really reckless, to even ask the teacher to change tables. He's really an idiot, to dare tell Teacher Steve that the table was too small in front of so many people. The most unfathomable thing is that he wants Teacher Steve to change tables for him. Heavens, for him to confront Teacher Steve about the table being used. Does he not know that Teacher Steve is the strictest teacher in all of Kargath Academy? Quite a few people began to point at Jian Chen in discussion, looking at him as if he was an idiot. The inspecting elder's expression changed, as he furrowed his brows and stared severely at Jian Chen. He snorted and then in a low voice said, "What's your name? You even tried to confront a teacher like this. This table was prepared ages ago. It's not something that can be changed just because you said it should be changed." Jian Chen's words not only irritated the inspecting teacher. Even a few of the teachers judging from the back could not help but knit their brows as they looked at Jian Chen with displeased expressions. Jian Chen's words were completely disrespectful to them as teachers. Not a single one of the people even considered the fact that Jian Chen had requested for change in tables because the current table had no way of fitting all the monster cores inside his space belt. Of course, there were some teachers who were exceptions. Their demeanors were still very calm. Their faces only showed a light trace of a smile. These few were the ones who watched Jian Chen and Tai Ta viciously kill a group of blue wolf kings. At this time behind them, a beautiful girl with a pair of bright eyes stared suspiciously at Jian Chen's figure, frowning in deep thought and whispering softly, "Strange. Why do I feel that his shadow is a little familiar? Maybe I've met him somewhere." The girl's eyebrows furrowed as she thought hard. Suddenly, her eyes flashed, and a familiar figure appeared in her mind. The next moment, her eyes exposed a look of surprise accompanied by a magical color. She unconsciously shouted, "Changyang Xiang Tian, he is Changyang Xiang Tian." The girl's voice was not concealed at all, so many people heard her. The moment everyone heard the name Changyang Xiang Tian, their faces started to change as the students who had been recklessly hurling insults Changyang Xiang Tian started to shut their mouths like obedient children. Changyang Xiang Tian was a name that was prominent throughout Kargath Academy and was practically heard of by everyone. However, not many people had actually seen what he looked like. Most of who did were freshmen. Jian Chen's face was rendered indistinctive with all of the mud and grime that left very little of his face unblemished. His clothes were also extremely tattered to the point of him looking like a beggar. With his current state of appearance, no one would be able to recognize him even when he was lined up in front of everyone. After hearing Changyang Xiang Tian's name, the teacher in charge of inspecting the monster cores went blank as he gave a closer look. Apparently, Changyang Xiang Tian was a name even the teacher was familiar with. However, that didn't mean that Jian Chen had the proper authority to be able to command him to bring a new table. The teacher's mouth dropped open one more time in disbelief before preparing himself to speak again, but at that moment, Bai En from the academy board called out, "Someone bring out a bigger table immediately." There was a smile on his face instead one of discontent. Instead, he was looking at Jian Chen with anticipation as if he had already guessed the reason why Jian Chen had wanted a bigger table. The vice headmaster Bai En looked as if he was 34 years old, but his prestige within Kargath Academy was exceptionally high, second only to the headmaster himself. When he had spoken, all of the teachers went silent. Aside from a few teachers, the other teachers had not understood what the vice headmaster was trying to say. To think that he had asked for a bigger table even though the original table was more than enough to register a student's monster cores count, there was just simply no use for a bigger table. Soon after, a 3-meter long and 2-meter wide table was lifted up to the stage, and the original table that had been used by the inspecting teacher was taken away. "Changyang Xiang Tian, you should be satisfied with this, right?" The inspecting teacher sat in front of the larger table. His attitude towards Jian Chen was not very amiable. It was evident that Jian Chen's request for a larger table had left an extremely bad impression on the 50 to 60-year-old teacher. Seeing that the elder's heart had some sort of prejudice against him, Jian Chen could not help but smile bitterly. He hadn't imagined that just because of something like this, the teacher would actually have something against him. This had definitely gone against his expectations, but Jian Chen didn't mind it too much. Afterwards, Jian Chen directly removed his space belt. Unlike the other students that had removed the monster cores one by one, he directly grabbed a handful of 10 monster cores and pulled them out, lightly placing them on the table. All of these monster cores were faint white in color, and were about 1 circle larger than the size of an adult's finger. Seeing Jian Chen pull out 10 monster cores at once, although the appraising elder was previously unsatisfied with Jian Chen's earlier actions, he could not help inwardly nodding. However, just as the appraising elder had assumed these were all the monster cores Jian Chen had, Jian Chen's hand once again reached into his space belt, and continued to pull out a great handful of monster cores. Once again, there were 10 of them in his hand. Now there were already 20 monster cores on the table in front. Seeing this, the appraising elder's eyes lit up. He looked at Jian Chen in astonishment and inwardly thought to himself, this Chongyang Xiang Tian's reputation is indeed not undeserved. Although he has not yet reached saint level, he was able to defeat a saint. It seems that he really is quite skilled. Following this, Jian Chen continued to reach into his space belt and once again pulled out a handful of monster cores to gently place onto the table. Dong dong dong, sounds rang out as the hard monster cores came into contact with the wooden table. Seeing Jian Chen once again take out 10 monster cores from his space belt, the expression of the appraising elder had instantly changed. His eyes now reflected complete shock, since by now, Jian Chen had taken out 30 monster cores, 7 more than Mu Tian had. For a student that had not yet reached saint level to have killed 30 Class 1 magical beasts within 3 days inside the forest was undoubtedly a record. Even the elder that had gone around the world and witnessed many things before could not help but be dumbstruck by disbelief. Although these magical beasts had relatively low attack power, it was by no means an easy task for a student only at the peak of the 10th Saint Force layer to kill them. When Jian Chen grabbed 30 monster cores, the teacher evaluating him became astonished, along with the other teachers behind him as they watched this inconceivable sight. Only a few teachers who had inside information on the matter had a smile on their faces while the students lined up behind him had been dumbstruck when he had pulled the 30 monster cores out. But Jian Chen didn't bother to look at the stupefied expressions on the teachers and students around him. While everyone was staring at him, his hands went into his space belt once more and grabbed another bunch of monster cores to put onto the table. When his hand refused to stop, the teachers all looked on with a sluggish expression, as the cycle repeated and he reached into his space belt and grabbed yet another handful. Soon after Jian Chen had placed a couple handsful of monster cores onto the table, the big official table was filled with monster cores. Although they were all Class 1 monster cores, because they came from different species, the cores would not be the same size or shape. Small cores were almost the size of the big toe of a person, and the biggest cores were the size of a small child's fist. Whether it was a student or teacher, both groups had been put into shock by Jian Chen. For a person who was not yet at the saint level state to hunt and kill almost 100 Class 1 magical beast in a span of 3 days. If someone were to try to say this to someone else, they wouldn't be believed. At this moment, aside from a small amount of people, every other person would not believe that it was Jian Chen who had killed all these magical beasts. Many people had thought that the huge amount of monster cores were a result of many people helping him collect monster cores or that he had stolen them. The consensus was that he could not have killed all those Class 1 magical beasts by himself. Seeing the official table being covered by a little under 100 monster cores from Jian Chen, the teacher in charge of counting them let out a deep breath. Although in his heart he thought that Jian Chen had to have fought many other groups for their monster cores. He had to admire Jian Chen's strength however. Even when it came to dishonorable acts like thievery, the teachers would not care since this is a common event in the Tianyuan continent. Seeing almost 100 Class 1 monster cores from Jian Chen, the vice headmaster Bian let loose an incredulous look. He knew in his heart that the reason why the second region had so many less people hunting for monster cores was because they had been robbed by Jian Chen. There was no doubt that Jian Chen had stolen all of the monster cores from someone else. Otherwise, everyone would have passed the test with the monster cores they earned by a legitimate show of strength from killing magical beasts. With this recent development, the vice headmaster Bian was quite emotional today as even his heart shook. Though at the same time, there was a small amount of doubt. Could it be that Jian Chen and Tai Ta could easily kill magical beasts without even adding chi to weapons? Were they just not using cultivation anymore? Unexpectedly, Jian Chen and Tai Ta had both killed around 100 magical beasts over the span of the last 3 days. The look in the teacher's eye was quite complicated. Soon after he had started to count the monster cores on the table, the teacher didn't ask how Jian Chen had acquired these monster cores since the definite conclusion was already clear in his mind. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.